Okay, we're live. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to Critical Faculty, the English edition. I'm your host, Hani Salim. We are waiting on a couple of very important people to join us in a minute, and I'll introduce you to both of them in just a minute. Can you confirm that you can hear me all right, and I don't sound too loud and obnoxious? Right. The topic is right underneath here. The website or the YouTube channel Critical Faculty's address is also underneath. Has science ended philosophy is the topic for discussion today. And I am going to be joined with two fantastic people to put this debate to bed once and for all. I'm not sure if it's a debate in the first place, but this got a background, so I'm going to explain this in a minute once everybody's is on the panel. We're waiting for Aaron Adair and Professor or Dr. Aaron Adair and Jonathan M.S. Pearce. One resides in the U.S., is an American, and the other, who has just joined us now, is an Englishman in New York. Not in New York, he's an Englishman in England. And here's Aaron. So all what you need, guys, now is request to enter the live. So if do you know how to request Aaron and Jonathan? So I'm going to invite you to the panel now. You're going to see an invite coming to you, Aaron and Jonathan. Please accept. And you will be here. Hello, hello.
Hello, can you hear me at least?
Yes, we can hear you quite clearly.
Can you see me?
No, we can't. So you got to enable your camera. So there will be like a cam little icon, and you need to turn that on.
Yep, I'm rocking and rolling.
Oh, tech savvy.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, this is my first proper foray into the world of TikTok. I mean, I thought philosophy and geopolitics was hard enough, but TikTok is just a whole different thing.
Oh, suddenly you'll be affixed with an elephant trunk as a gift from those who think you're
Brilliant.
marvelous.
I can't wait.
Hi, Aaron.
Hello, Domino's Pizza.
What kind of pizza? Pepperoni? I'm all right with pepperoni.
The answer is yes. Pretty much. If you have a pizza, I'll help you with it.
So, what's happening, guys, on PC? Because this is TikTok. I'm on PC. You are probably on your phone. So
I'm on my phone.
Yeah. So what's going to happen is whoever speaks. Let's say Jonathan is about to speak. So I am going to expand him like that, and he becomes the center.
Oh Jesus! Don't do that. That was scary. I wasn't prepared for that, and nor was anyone else.
No, that's all right. And you can obviously. I'm not sure if you want to see the comments and stuff, but I will be able to read the comments for you, especially if there are specific questions. But if you sort of put the phone slightly away from you, so there's a bit of a distance.
Yeah, that's going to be quite difficult with where I'm at.
No, that's all right. Yeah. Oh, that's perfect. It is great. Now I can see a chin. Before I just saw a gigantic nose.
Ouch. You mentioned elephant trunk. But yeah.
And so let's try as well the same thing with Aaron. Expanding Aaron. Okay, looks good. I can see the full head and a bit of shoulder. It's an ad for a certain shampoo, if you know what I'm
His beard is getting even more biblical.
Yeah, I know. It's getting really sort of
So
mosaic.
we've just finished a book on Moses and the Exodus. We're just putting the finishing touches on a 450-page book, and I think as Aaron has done this quite oftentimes, original scholarship into Moses, I think he's actually become Moses. The more he looks into the eyes of the beast, as I think Nietzsche said, the more the beast becomes him, and he has just become Moses.
I can see
I
that.
actually think it's kind of gone the opposite direction. I'm not going Moses, I'm going Gandalf. And
Right, fair enough.
specifically
Quite a
because
difference.
I'm going to be doing a bit of reverse Moses, because what does Moses do? He parts the Red Sea for everyone to cross. I am on the other side of the Red Sea with my own magical staff saying, "You shall not pass."
Yes. Yeah. Which is a metaphor about your belief in the real and historic Exodus shall not pass. It doesn't pass the muster.
Yes, but the Balrog, completely historical.
100%. Yeah. You sold me.
So, guys, I just want to give you a bit of a background about why we're having this chat in the first place, because a lot of people think, what do you mean, philosophy and science? Is this actually an issue? So, there, as you know, I've got a second identity of being an Egyptian man. And my podcast is in Arabic, and it's a different world, a completely different mindset, a different world, different way of thinking, different culture. I've got to really like swap personality. I'm talking Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, the whole shebang in terms of, women should cover themselves and things that in the West shouldn't be like. It's not even, doesn't even figure in somebody's minds. But I've got to be subject to that on a daily basis. And this issue has become apparent because actually the atheistic community in the Middle Eastern atheistic community is so fond of science at the moment, and you know the term scientism, where do you think science is the lens that everything should be seen, and which is I disagree with, and I will explain why I disagree with that sort of notion. But basically, they're saying philosophy is there's no place for it. It's intellectual masturbation at this point. That's what they are thinking at this point.
Is there anything wrong with that?
Well, we all do. That hit of dopamine. It's a secret that is not really a secret, but we all do it, and some more than others. I confess that I am a sucker for a good conversation with a bit of intellect behind it. So consider me guilty. But this is the situation where I wanted to show, and I will introduce now Aaron. I'll actually let each of them introduce themselves, because I've got a couple of very good friends that I've known for years. On the left-hand side, Aaron Adair is a scientist, and not one of those scientists that, your CERN rodeo will beg to differ. That I think you are a true scientist, and in terms of the scientific method, at least, I know career-wise we are taken by different turns and twists of the reality of trying to make a living, but that's a different story altogether. In terms of, so we've got a scientist on the left here, Aaron. We've got a philosopher who's gone also and venture out in the geopolitical world for a little bit, but I can still feel that the philosophy running in the veins of Jonathan. So, and they're both good friends, and they both collaborate on writing books together. So I've thought, what's the best way to end this debate by having the two sides collaborating on certain things. So I will start with let's start with science first. First, it's because it's the burden of proof, right? Science is claiming that it's ended philosophy, so I'm going to give the burden of proof to Aaron, and ask Aaron to please introduce yourself, a little bit about your scientific background, what you've done at CERN, and what is your connection with science at the moment.
All right, yeah. So, because you mentioned CERN a couple of times, my adventures getting over there were a bit interesting. So I did my PhD work in physics at The Ohio State University. I was originally going there to do things in astrophysics, cosmology, ended up a couple of years doing some research at CERN, and at the end did my PhD thesis research tangentially with that, you could say, actually in physics education research. So I have all sorts of neutrinos going through my body because of my past. It's a bit interesting. At CERN, I did have to wear a dosimeter every time I was going around to see how much radiation I was taking in. But honestly, I had more radiation hitting me flying over the Atlantic Ocean to get to CERN in Geneva than I did the whole time working there. So there's maybe, I don't want to say too much worry about radiation, but it is not like Simpsons level of hazards.
I don't know. I reckon you're going to live longer than Moses now. So
let us hope. Doctor might say I need some help to get there, but nonetheless, I am currently a research affiliate at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, continuing physics education research. Have a couple papers either already published or in the review process. You know, we're doing science there, but my day jobs are also in data science, so a bit more private sector, but using machine learning, as much compute as I can get my hands on, stuff that science has made possible.
That is fantastic. Just a quick question on the CERN journey. Was the fear of a black hole emerging out of the collider, was it actually real, or was it just a sort of a bogus story that sort of emerged afterwards? Were there actually fears that a black hole would emerge?
Okay, this is going to be a bit funny. So, did any physicists fear this working at CERN? Absolutely not. And you can see why extremely well for one particular reason. You look at the energies that are at CERN. Are they pretty high? Yes. But more energetic particles hit Earth coming from outer space all the time, and Earth is being bombarded by these sorts of particles for the last 4.5 billion years. Have we been turned into a black hole because of that? No. Pretty strong empirical evidence on its own that that's not going to happen. So where did this whole CERN is going to make a black hole and destroy the world come from? It came from one guy from Hawaii whose argument, quite literally, was it's 50-50 because it either might happen or it might not happen. And there's only one
it's good science
political or news organization that actually went to the guy to have him explain his reasoning. Just one. And I want you to think about what news organization will get to the bottom of this.
Well, I'm glad you admit that the
Fox
universe
News
is fine tuned. Somehow you.
Not quite. So, whatever news organization you're thinking of, you're wrong. The answer is The Daily Show.
Right. Nice.
Now, to Jonathan, the philosopher. What's your story with philosophy? How did it start?
Well, so, oh my goodness, it went back to the starting of a pub group that we used to have, the Tippling Philosophers, from which I get, well, I don't blog anymore, but I used to blog under the moniker of a Tippling Philosopher. And we used to meet once a month and do philosophy. And then I thought, right, I better ratify this with some philosophical qualifications. So that was like the heart of it. But I've always been interested and curious, and I'm going to talk about curiosity, I think, a little bit. And essentially, I've been a philosopher of religion. I've written, I don't know, a half dozen books or so on whether or not God exists. And I think we probably need to talk a little bit about science and religion, because I think there's a lot to say about that, which is fairly relevant to the conversation at hand. But I'm no massive expert on some of the topics that one might be. I mean, the problem with philosophy is that you can spend an entire philosophical career in one small niche area of philosophy, such as, whether abstract ideas exist or what the ontology of abstract ideas is, a real niche area, and actually not be able to comment too much on, I don't know, aesthetics or this or that. And so, philosophy is the study of the entire world, essentially. And so therefore, you can have an expertise in one area, but not necessarily in another. But essentially, I think my starting position here would be the kind of idea, somewhat broken, that science is in tension with philosophy because science is philosophy. And I think we need to basically try and understand what the position is or what the words mean or what the question is. Because just to finish off this idea, like for me, philosophy, I mean, is the systematic, fundamental questions concerning reality, all of reality, of which science is a subset. So science is a form of epistemology, which is a study of knowledge and truth. So science is a way of, is a method on the one hand of finding knowledge and truth, and is also just a whole base of knowledge to understand science as a kind of like repository of knowledge. But essentially, epistemology is a subset of philosophy, and so therefore science can't be in tension with philosophy because science is philosophy. I mean, it used to be called natural philosophy, so there is that. Anyway, there's your starting point.
That's brilliant. And I'm going to give a slight background to the conversation because I think spot on. Jonathan, I'll give you the microphone one more time because it is we're going to have to start with philosophy, because even though the burden of proof was with science, but I understand Aaron's is not going to try to prove that science is actually truly aimed at philosophy. He's hopefully trying to argue that they kind of can coexist, and not just can, they are coexisting as we speak. It's just those who don't understand the definitions and the paradigm of both fields that actually in sort of overlap most of the time anyway. But just a bit of background about myself. I'm not quite sure if I told you ever, but I've got 2 university degrees too, sort of a BA in linguistics, German, Spanish, Italian, French, Arabic, and I've learned Hebrew and a bit of Latin to work on my biblical studies. And then I had postgraduate studies in psychology, and then I've academically trained in philosophy, so I do have a master's degree in philosophy from the University of Auckland in New Zealand, and finally a master in business administration in Australia for the requirements of my job, which has nothing to do with anything I'm interested in. It's in the world of supply chain and logistics.
Nice.
So the conversation is okay. We understand that humanity, from the word go, we're trying to make sense of things around them. You got to, right? Because you want to sort of create tools. You want to make life easier. You're inquisitive, smart or smarter being. Trying to find better ways of surviving, better way of harvesting, finding a mate, all these sort of things that sort of required for you to obtain improved knowledge that works. And that's to me the history of philosophy never started with the Greeks as claimed, but it started from the beginning of Homo sapien, and it took a degree of evolution until it got framed. I mean, we can tell that the Greek era, the pre-Socratic, all the way to the Socratic method, Plato, Aristotle. This is now we're talking about putting all these ideas within a proper framework for the first time. But the fire was always burning before, if I can quote Billy Joel, it was always burning. It's never stopped from the word go. Humanity needed to find a way to make things better from themselves, and that's what the love of wisdom or knowledge has started. Philosophy. That is what the word means. However, we are always looks like, and science can get involved in this, that we're always restricted by the tools that we have and the lenses we have. And the better the tools, the better our knowledge. And we're talking about 2,500 years ago, and even before, the tools were limited. There were clever humans, very clever humans, even to the standards of today, that were trying to find a way and trying to understand the world around them. But they got a lot of things wrong. Not because they were stupid, I think because they were limited in terms of the accumulative knowledge before them. As a matter of fact, I think these were the giants that were standing on their shoulders at the moment, because these are the people who started the whole thing without an accumulation or a background of knowledge. But let's start with definitions, because I think spot on, Jonathan. You said the devil is in the details and the definition. A lot of people don't understand what is philosophy. What does it mean? What does it entail? Did it evolve from 2,500 years ago to today's philosophy that deals with completely different issues than 2,500 years ago? Obviously, epistemology and ontology is still the same, but there are things like in axiology and ethics and stuff. These are different realms, and they will continue to be different as we venture into the AI model.
My goodness. Well, so much to unpack here. Where do we start? I think what defines humanity, what makes us different to so many other, perhaps almost all other animals to a large degree, is our curiosity. Now, some animals are curious. You might say a dog is curious, so on and so forth. But our curiosity drives us on to find out more and more about the world, even when it doesn't necessarily pertain to our survival. So we've taken maybe an evolutionary biological driver to become, I don't know, competitively more superior to our competitors by being sort of more curious and answering questions that we might have that can give us an advantage. But now I think we've got to the point where, like, we want to find out the answers to ridiculously obscure questions that might not have any effect on our survivability. So like, I think that is a very human trait, right? But you know, a good example of this evolution that you were kind of talking about in terms of trying to find out answers is essentially humans are always trying to find out as much about reality as possible, but sometimes there are obstacles that get in the way. And this is where we can talk about the tension between, and I think there is a tension between science and religion. So with religion, you often start with a holy book or a set of presupposed ideals, right, that pertain to claimed knowledge, and that stops scientific endeavor. That stops human curiosity. That's to say that here is how things are. This is how they've always been since this book was written, and this is how they will be forever and a day. And you can't go against that. So that kind of ends curiosity, and it ends a scientific endeavor. And I think that's a real problem. Now, we used to think that, for example, thunder and lightning was the anger of, say, Thor. Okay, but then we understood what thunder and lightning were from a physical point of view. And what you see, and Richard Carrier made a point of this in a debate once, where he said that naturalism has supplanted supernaturalism 10,000 times in a row. Like, it has never gone the other way. So supernaturalism as an explanation for data has never replaced a naturalistic explanation for any data points. And from a kind of horse racing betting point of view, why would you ever bet on supernaturalism? Why would you bet on religion as an epistemology going forward if that horse has lost 10,000 times in a row? And so I think, science is compared to religion, and that's not to say versus philosophy, but science versus religion is a much more useful epistemological tool with which we can find out about the world. And I'll leave it to I can give you a definition of a science, but we'll leave it to the scientists to do that. But I think that as far as philosophy goes, which is using tools to find out more about the world, but not necessarily empirically about the world. I mean, a kind of folk definition would be philosophy is a systematic study of fundamental questions concerning existence, knowledge, ethics, reason, and reality, derived from the Greek for love of wisdom. So it can be about critical thinking, about using rationality effectively, of which science ends up, as I said earlier, being one of the tools of philosophy. So anyway, I don't know if Aaron wants to just give us a definition of science.
Definitely go to a definition of science, but do you agree that then philosophy, being the mother of all sciences or the mother of knowledge, is the framework that will forever need to exist, because this is the skeletal structure? You can still have subsets and subtools that will work within those philosophical. For example, this very conversation we're having right now, does it use scientific method, or does it use the skeletal and the infrastructure that's been put by logic, and by extension, philosophy. The universe is intelligible. The external reality exists. So these things are axiomatic, and axioms are predications by philosophy and logic rather than science.
So the question then becomes, what can't science answer? Right, and for that we might need to know what science is, but essentially, like using that analogy I used earlier, the horse race, like what happened with God is God used to be a parochial, powerful entity that lived in a local area. Right, we've just written a book, as mentioned, on say Moses and the Exodus, and Yahweh started as a local regional god before he became like the most powerful of the gods in the area. So you move from polytheism to kind of henotheism. He was the most supreme god. Then he became the one god, and then he got pushed outside of the region, to outside the world, to outside the universe, right? As we see the evolution of the idea of God, we see that reacting to the increased knowledge that we get through scientific endeavors, so that we understand more and more of the world. So we don't need God to explain things like lightning, thunder, and so on and so forth. So what happens is God gets pushed out and out and out, further and further, because God is not needed functionally to explain these few things that are left unexplained. And that is kind of what we're talking about with regard to science and philosophy. So science can explain so much about the world, but what can't it explain? Now, you might then say, therefore God, because I can't explain that using science. So I'll just plug in the God of the gaps sort of explanation as a tool. But we're left with, well, consciousness, how did the universe start? The laws of physics broke down at the Big Bang, so we can't use science to predict a breakdown of science. Ethics, morality, are these things that science can tell us about? I mean, there's an element of using data to inform our moral calculations, but so on and so forth. So,
but before I give the mic to Aaron, I just want to clarify two distinct points here. So I know we're trying to invoke God because that's another method that is sort of stuck its nose to provide knowledge in this world. But the main point is, a lot of people are saying philosophy needs to stop. That's it. It's done its work. Thank you very much, philosophy. You were needed 2,500 years ago. You no longer need it. Science has replaced you. You're not.
But even making that assertion is a philosophical. I mean, you have
correct.
to do. You have to do philosophy to have an establishment that philosophy is dead type thing, or So this is metaphysics versus physics, but you're still. There's a bit of an issue of there. It's almost self-defeating. But, yeah.
So just for the sake of the audience and people who are hearing us now, Aaron is going to have the mic to explain what is science, what is the scientific method. The three of us are going to chat for probably another 30 minutes to 45 minutes. And I'm pretty sure you'll be curious about this, guys. There's a lot of people from, Egyptian background, Lebanese background, and they will have questions for us. Are you okay of bringing people to the panel and taking questions relevant to the topic today?
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course.
So long as they already agree.
or a slice of pizza.
Definitely.
Okay, all yours.
All right. So I think it's going to be difficult for me to find any significant disagreement with Jonathan, because I also see science in some ways as a subset of philosophy. And it's not the case that philosophy is done or that philosophy is useless, in my opinion. I mean, just one branch of philosophy that is still active, and I know I use it in my science all the time: logic. Try doing science without logic, and you will be not a good scientist, to put it mildly. And I have to say, the very existence of science as like the study of nature is itself a philosophical innovation that is quite ancient. When I've tried looking at the history of science, to see where this whole idea comes from, often a lot of sources will point back to Thales of Miletus, who start saying, hey, let's try to explain the world not with gods getting angry with each other, but through natural processes. The idea that nature is actually this separate entity that runs and does things on its own was itself a philosophical innovation, which became kind of a necessary condition to ever create natural science or natural philosophy. If you don't think there's a nature, how can you have a natural philosophy, after all? So the very existence of science is predicated on the work done by philosophers of the past. What is science now? I mean, people will say it's the study of the natural world. I'll be a little bit broader in that science is a strategy of learning about things by creating hypotheses and gathering evidence to test against those hypotheses. Sometimes it can also be done in terms of thought experiments, but where it works best is where it can collect data. It's also because science is out there collecting data in huge amounts with controlled data collection, controlled experiments, that it can come to much more definitive conclusions than philosophical thought, because there are so many more difficulties that might exist when you're just trying to, think through all the possibilities, or you've created definitions that may not match things out in the world. The fact that the scientists can go in their lab and be very careful about what goes into the test tubes, a level of control that we can't necessarily have in our debate scenarios. Also, very often what we can do in science is because we have been able to clarify what we are looking for after enough deliberation of what we are out there expecting in the first place. Where we don't have a clear expectation of what we might find because we haven't fully worked out the implications, it's kind of hard to do science at that point, in which case our arguments are more philosophical. Just one area in science right now that the argument is right now fundamentally philosophical because we can't check it empirically. Interpretations of quantum mechanics. Do you believe the Copenhagen interpretation? Do you believe in many worlds? Do you believe in cubism? Not cubism in like the art form, but the idea that it's a form of that you're treating the Schrödinger equation as actually a statement about our knowledge, and it's some sort of Bayesian framework that when we're making measurements, we're just learning about things, not actually doing physical processes. There are many arguments about what is the true form, and the argument isn't ultimately, well, we did this experiment so we know which one's right. It's, no, this is the one which we think has the greatest explanatory power, that has the least number of complicating features. You will see people arguing about this, and when they're actually arguing well, you realize, oh, all of those arguments are fundamentally philosophical, not p-value statistics, because we've been able to go at the Large Hadron Collider and say, we figured out the mass of this new particle, and it's only consistent with many worlds. We haven't been able to do that yet, so the arguments have to be philosophical.
A lot of the physicists at the moment, cosmologists, even back in the day, the point of elegance, like why the universe is the steady state theory, why the forms of these spheres, because it's more elegant that way. Why equations should be short and succinct, because it's more elegant. Isn't elegant? It's kind of aesthetics, and therefore it's part of axiology. We're going back to what is pretty, what is beautiful, what is elegant, and these are value. And I'm gonna now press the David Hume great argument, out from is. So if science can tell you what things are, us as humans to decide what is good for us going forward as a value statement now. What do we do? Can science tell us what to do next?
Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt. That's a really important question, but before we lose what Aaron's just said there, I think, so can you park that for a second? Like, it was really important he mentioned that, say, the law of non-contradiction or logic. So the idea of the law of non-contradiction, I would say, is a philosophical one, but then you can get some fairly in-depth argumentation as to whether, well, that's just a self-evident truth about observation. And you can argue whether something like the law of non-contradiction, but then if we're talking about axioms and how to justify axioms, then you're doing philosophy. So if you're starting with the law of non...
Is it a priori or a posteriori? Is it? Yeah, that's
that's so we go back to some of the key arguments of of philosophy, a priori, a posteriori, and you can then argue that, look, if you were born into a vacuum with no senses at all, you just existed as a thing, then I don't think you could ever know about the law of non-contradiction. Really, I think you have to have inputs and data in order to be able to observe. I think law of non-contradiction is an observed feature of reality, and so I don't know that it's a priori. But these get. But the larger point is that in order to kind of do science, you're using the building blocks of philosophy. And even to say that science is useful, you're having to say, well, what is use? Like, what do we want out of reality? How should things be? And if things should be this way, then actually we can use science to get us, using data and empirical research, to get us to a point where we are at that place. But the ought statement of like the world ought to be this way, I think necessarily you're having to do philosophy. So I just do not think it's I think you have to do both to get to where we want to get to.
That's smart. I mean, so people, there are a lot of people in the audience think it's a debate. It's not really at this point, because I'm introducing two people who are collaborating. And how many books you guys have written together?
This would be our second one together. But we've worked on books previously. Like I've worked with Aaron on his book on the Star of Bethlehem, editorially.
Yeah, and we also, I think we both also contributed to one or two books with John Loftus.
That's correct. Yeah, we've contributed chapters to Loftus's book. Christianity in the Light of Science, I think, was one of them, and then another one. Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. So just a little bit on science as well. There is the term scientism, where a lot of people I had Lawrence Krauss multiple times on my channel, and I think he softened a bit over the years, but there were a couple of scientists who were known to be very hard on philosophy and saying philosophy is woo-hoo. It's almost like Deepak Chopra, but the Greek one, in terms of it's muffled words put together to mean to sound like it's important, but it doesn't really yield any practical knowledge. Idealism, for example, by Plato, that the world is a reflection, and we're not seeing the reality. We're seeing something else. When I look at the holographic principle by Leonard Susskind, and I look at the quantum mechanics where stuff and matter disappears and gets replaced by mathematical equations. Literally, that's like when you open the Matryoshka Russian doll and you go to the smallest of the dolls, and who knows, there might be still something within that little tiny doll. Base reality is not made.
You'll find a lot of quantum physicists are getting very much involved with philosophy. And I was going to at some point talk about idealism, which is where mental experience has primacy in the universe. So, we, in order to have science, in order to have data, in order to be able to take in inputs and phenomena, we must be an experiencing entity. And therefore, so idealists will claim that, the experiencing entity has primacy in the in reality. And then the question is, well, can science even tell us anything about, this is almost like the hard question of consciousness, but can science tell us anything about mental experience and qualia, or is science a tool that we use after, we start with these more basic principles which science can't touch, arguably. But anyway, sorry, that's just going off on one. Back to you, Aaron.
What's it like from a scientific point of view, these areas where things are touching on, I don't want to say the absurd, but we've evolved not to understand these things. We've evolved to see things at medium speeds and medium size. Once you enter into the micro and the macro universe, everything sounds a bit weird. Well, to us, because we're not used to it. Our logic is built upon running in the savannah, trying to find food and finding mates. But when we are hit by these realities of that, the reality might actually not be, I don't want to say real, but real in the sense that it's made of stuff that we can touch even though these are points, the electron is actually not a thing that people can actually hold on to. It's a probability in the quantum clouds. How do you reconcile that? Like when you think at night and you're going, shit, everything that I'm touching at the very base reality of it, it's probably looks more like a program or code of some sort.
You're now actually making me think of a line from Futurama where Lure of Omicron Persei 8 eats a drugged up hippie and then starts having all sorts of hippy dippy thoughts. My hands are so amazing they can touch anything in the world except themselves. Whoa. So sorry, that's where my brain goes with that particular question. But to bring it, I guess, closer to home for me, even though a lot of the stuff in science obviously gets super weird, super abstract, it's still the case that it provides what we can call knowledge, justified true belief, if we want to use the classical definition of knowledge, and use that knowledge to learn new things and add to our knowledge, and more importantly, use that knowledge to some sort of end that we can see it have some ultimate kind of practical thing. It may not be directly the case that what you study will then somehow turn into practical knowledge, but by building up that knowledge base, it allows us to learn and discover new things, and as that builds up more and more, we can do more and more. Obviously, I'm not going to be, going into my garage and, getting a bucket of Higgs bosons so that way I can, put it on my cereal. Well, maybe if I get a big enough gas generator. No. This is still, though, useful knowledge to us physicists because it's telling us fundamentally how matter works, how the fields of the universe work and interact. That sort of study, that fundamental thing, has led us to understand better how things go and will lead to our next innovations. I mean, when we discovered the neutron, we discovered something that's slightly heavier than the proton with no electric charge. What's the point? Why is this interesting? Oh, the neutron doesn't feel the electric charge, so could we use it to hit nuclei of other atoms without having to overcome the Coulomb force? Could that split things apart? Oh goodness, I can see where this is going now. Just knowing about a little particle like that seems useless somehow can lead to explosive results. I'm not saying Higgs bosons will lead to such a thing, but that's the sort of thing that science does all the time, gathering knowledge because it's interesting and then finding out new things because of what you now know. If you want a more recent example of this, I don't know how many people are dealing with weight loss, but Ozempic has become this really new popular drug and innovation, and it was discovered because somebody was studying the venom from a Gila monster. People are just, messing around with oversized lizards in Sumatra, Java. I forget exactly where they are, but, who would have thought, some grad students, trying to, get venom out of a oversized animal like that would lead to perhaps saving of thousands, if not millions of lives because we now have a better way of dealing with obesity. You would not have guessed that unless you were willing to say, hey, let's explore things because they're interesting. And knowing lots of interesting things is actually a good, a moral good, I would argue, which of course is the moral philosophy, which means another reason we need to do philosophy.
Yeah, and I wonder whether, in a sense, science is about answering questions out there, and philosophy is a case of answering questions within. Whether that's a kind of relevant distinction to make, I think that's definitely an element for it. I mean, some of the things that we could argue science doesn't and maybe can't answer, and we can debate these, of course. We've already talked about validating its own sort of fundamental assumptions, so that idea that self-referential idea, and like determining how you can use scientific knowledge or how you should use it, those kind of moral questions, and morality and ethics as well. Aesthetics is another area where you could argue science doesn't or can't answer some of these ultimate questions of metaphysics. You might think, like, for example, the existence of God or not, because science can push God completely out of, like I said earlier, pushing it further and further out of our kind of lived experience. But can it fully disprove the idea? Because you can always, like a pea in a shell game, you can move the cup around so that God ends up being this kind of different entity than you started with, and you get away with having to admit that God doesn't exist. And then the hard problem
of cup that you were moving around in the shell game.
Yeah. And the hard problem of the consciousness, so like, individual personal experience, like how does science, answer that problem? And so I think there's always going to be an element of philosophy working with science.
Sorry to interrupt you there, Jonathan. Do you guys think it's? I mean, David Chalmers is a fellow Aussie who started this charade. Do you think, because Daniel Dennett never thought it was actually that hard?
Yeah, so you can try and erase the problem and say it's not a problem. Or you can try and answer it through a completely naturalistic framework. There are lots of different options. I mean, the thing is, if any one of these had been an absolute winner of a theory, then no one would be debating it still. But it's still massively debated, and so sometimes it depends what your biases already are. So if you're like a naturalist who doesn't believe in God, is very much a physicalist or materialist, or depending on how you want to define these words, then you might really be wanting to prefer one theory of how to explain qualia over another. So yeah, I think it's still an open debate, and maybe it's something that science will never be able to explain.
I'll tell you what I think, and please evaluate my thoughts to you both. And by the way, half an hour, guys, and we'll start asking for people to come up and ask questions. This is what I'm thinking here, and I could be wrong. It's very handy for a living being to create an internal representation of the external world. The brain has a certain capacity, it cannot compute all the data and the information in front of it. So it does indexing, and it does, completing pictures. Like I can give you a couple of paragraphs, and they'll be riddled with misspellings. And somehow when you read it properly. You probably don't see the spelling mistakes, and you would actually be able to completely read it because your brain takes a snapshot of things and complete data. That same brain, imagine the how handy it is to create an internal representation of the external world, which is what we call object permanence. So I can cover my eyes and I can still see the world inside my brain. Object permanence gives you focus on things while they're not in the vision spectrum, while you're not in the immediate. So that's obviously searching for food, trying to imagine where food could be. Multiple simulations of the future, because once you add that and time and the future, you can add strategic planning.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Well, all of that. I mean, that all sounds absolutely fabulous to me. Yeah, no problem with any of that. That's how our minds work. That's kind of sort of a theory of mine there. Almost computational understanding of consciousness, maybe. I think that sounds very. That's how useful all of these elements are, and then you start wondering, whether all of these ideas of our theory of mind or consciousness are elements of evolutionary biology at work to give us the ability to do things like predict the future, strategize, that gives us competitive advantages over animals and living things that can't do that. So yeah, all of that. I don't have any issue with anything you said particularly. Aaron?
There, of course, ultimately what would be the philosophical aspect of, when I try understanding how people argue against a physicalist understanding of consciousness, it does come ultimately down to a lot of thought experiments, which can be interesting in their own right, but they've not been exactly persuasive to me. So, for example, philosophical zombies or P-zombies. And I think Chalmers is the inventor of that, but please correct me.
I think you're right.
But my basic understanding is if it is possible to imagine a object that is, completely running on the laws of physics, but internally it doesn't actually have consciousness, just everything else that you can tell going on about it is following standard physics. And I guess the ultimate question is such a state of affairs possible? To me, that sounds impossible, but of course, I can't go in the lab and test it. And like I say, I think Jonathan is right that a lot of this comes down to your priors and just what you're going to be persuaded by.
But Aaron, why is it impossible?
About philosophical zombies.
Yeah, no, they do exist amongst us now. There was an exhibition in Germany. No, I'm not kidding you. Where have you seen the movie Companion?
No.
You got to. It's like Ex Machina type of theme.
Right.
But basically, you build a machine. Obviously, obeys the laws of logic, and make it act as if it has consciousness. It will act as if it has consciousness. You will not be able to tell the difference. So this is in the future where people who want to have a girlfriend, they'll have a companion, intellectual, sexual, whatever you call it, but it's a girlfriend, like completely. They fall in love. They have a story. The robot is completely convinced that it is a person that has feelings for this guy until there's a twist in the movie. So I don't want to burn it. It's a fantastic movie. It's called Companion. So that is the zombie that we're talking about now.
I mean, yeah, this is where you start going down philosophical thought experiment roads to, say, the experience machine, where the Matrix, is it better for humanity to exist in an invented world that gives us all of the feelings of the real world, so we can't tell the difference, and then we live like perfectly happy lives in these machines rather than go through the vagaries and the threats to our happiness and health by living in the real scare quotes real outside world. And anyway, that's not quite what we're talking about today, but I always like that as a thought experiment to ask people whether they would rather live in an experience machine or in scare quotes real reality.
But what I was trying
I'd go for the experience machine.
Yeah, what I was trying to allude as well is a lot of philosophers then on the other hand side, on the other side, they become quite extreme as well. So to combat scientism, they go, philosophy is the source of everything. If science cannot move an inch without us. And I want to create this world where philosophy and science is not a linear conversation where this is the framework and science does its thing, philosophy is detached. I want a world where these two entities are communicating. For example, morality and ethics. Eventually, we get to learn that animals' suffering is real. They have a central nervous system. Well, a few hundred years ago, we thought they had no souls and they feel no pain. Now we know they feel pain very similar to ourselves, especially when you go high in the spectrum in terms of sentience. Pigs, for example, with their intelligence and emotional intelligence and so forth, they're quite well capable of suffering, and even suffering before things happen. They can actually speculate traumatic experiences. So we get to learn about that because of science. Science then provides this information to philosophy. And philosophy looks again at it into its books and one of these ethical schools, and we go, okay, do we want to harm animals going forward for our taste buds? What is the balance? Maybe we need to survive because we're omnivorous, but however, we might have a better responsibility towards animals and the way we should treat them. If people insist on eating animals, then this is the sort of thing we should expect human beings to do going into the future. So here science has provided some data to axiology and to ethics to say, please revise your views. So I think there is a collaboration here.
So I wonder whether you're getting close to talking about, well, first of all, like the conversation, as I started out saying, it shouldn't be either or. Like science is embedded within philosophy, so there's no tension between them, and you just use science as there's no demarcation. Arguably, it's just this porous scenario. But I'm interested in what you were saying, because it sounds quite similar to. Do you remember some years back when Sam Harris brought out the book The Moral Landscape? Richard Carrier also had a chapter in one of our books, actually, Aaron, with John Loftus, where they're both trying to establish that morality can be a scientific endeavor. Now, we know that, like, if you want this particular moral value system to prevail, then you can start putting empirical data towards, you know, achieving that, because you say, right, we start off with this is what we want. Therefore, what's the best way of achieving this? Well, we have to do we use empirical data in order to get there. So, like, science can have an awful lot to do with morality, but the idea was that actually Sam Harris was trying to establish that it's just fundamentally axiomatic that we want well-being, and if that's kind of axiomatic, then there's almost like it's almost. We don't need to do philosophy. We just do science. Like, morality is therefore just science, given that axiom.
Yeah, I disagree. Obviously, that's The Moral Landscape and Objective Morality by Sam Harris. I think I'm not sure if he's changed his views on this a little bit. That was the young Sam Harris when he was quite energetic. It's very complicated, and he knows what kind of. I think Alex O'Connor has responded to a couple of things, and these things are problematic. No, I don't want science to inform on ethics. I want science to help. To provide data.
Yeah. Well, I think that is informing. Yeah. But not to define ethics.
Not to define, correct.
Maybe. Yeah.
It looks like defining it is going to be up to us. It looks like whether you like it or not, we're going to be responsible as human beings and sit down together and discuss what's good for us. Like we've always done. I think that's the only way.
So I suppose one way of looking at it is philosophy tells you what the destination is, and science tells you how to get there. It's like the route mapper. It's like you put it into the computer, and then science can tell you how to get to your destination, but it doesn't tell you what your destination should be. Maybe. I don't know if that's a good analogy.
Yeah, the problem is philosophy. If philosophy gives you a destination, it makes philosophy quite easy. Philosophy is quite complex. Philosophy will give you multiple
I'm not saying that's an easy thing to do. Yeah. Absolutely, 100%. And sometimes you might not be able to say, I actually don't know the destination. And then you end up going nowhere.
And it will tell you right in the middle of that sentence, it's not about the destination, you fool.
it's about the journey. Yeah, of course.
All right. So maybe we'll go into another topic, and then we can start opening up to the audience. Now, guys, whoever is listening to us here, this conversation is about science and philosophy. Some of the Arabic atheists believe that science has ended philosophy once and for all. Philosophy is no longer needed. We are arguing. We've got a scientist, Adair. We've got a philosopher, Jonathan Pearce. And we are, all three of us now, in agreement that these systems are all working together in tandem to produce a reality that is good for all of us. So there isn't really a problem here.
Or bad. I mean, that's not automatically true that they are working in tandem, because I would argue right now there's an awful lot of stuff that's very bad for us that's happening, and that's using philosophy and science, or maybe misusing. But you know, the theory of the game theory by John Nash, and the idea of free riders, that there's that equilibrium that we're always going to play together, because that's the only way we're going to survive together. And you'll have the freaking free riders. Who will always, lie and trying to manipulate and racketeer the system. And apparently, they are good for the game theory. They're needed, because this is how you evolve the rules. Quite possibly. The problem is where you get to a tipping point. So kind of free rider theory in most simplistic of terms would be, right, you go into a bar and they've got like a plate of donuts there, and it's like, right, put $1 in and you get a donut. Okay. And you're like, okay, but it's an honesty box. And so what you might factor in as a bar is that, I don't know, 20% of those donuts, someone's not going to pay. So we factor that into the pricing, but we'll put it at $1. And that means we're going to make a bit of money off those donuts, but there's an honesty box. But those 20% of free riders is kind of factored into the system. But if you get to say, I don't know, 50% of free riders or some critical mass, then the whole thing falls apart. And that's a bit like, you know, you can use that in all sorts of, I've used this applying to NATO, right, as a defensive alliance of countries. You can apply it to tax systems, all sorts. Like as soon as you get a critical mass, like free riders ruin everything. But it could well be that free riders are needed, or at least they can be used effectively in order to improve the systems. And but whether you need them at all, I don't know.
I think they're needed, and they never can reach 50%. It's almost like homosexuality. You know, I would argue the same thing. Because homosexuality scientifically has been we've got the hypothesis that they're called the benevolent uncle, where they actually need it after the sixth or the seventh male to help with the family, and somehow and they always stay at the same percentages. You know, the 5 to 10% throughout history. They can obviously because if they go on beyond that, there is a problem. And I think the same with free riders. They're always at that 5-10% value. They're needed to evolve the system so the system can be a more clever and the rules of engagement. However, the reality is we have evolved to collaborate. It's probably one of the two things that distinguish us from the rest of the animal species. A bit of higher intelligence and collaboration, so we can work on gigantic projects and
opposable thumbs, language, and abstraction. Yeah.
But I want to get Aaron's opinion on that, if he's got something to say.
I think I at least understand the arguments for why free riders will exist, like being a mathematical inevitability. On the other hand, why sometimes the free riders become running the whole country. That's another which hopefully has never happened.
So much to say on that.
It does also remind me of one other topic when it comes to the intersection of science and philosophy that I think is somewhat important. A lot of people will say a big part of science is discovering the laws of nature. And philosophers had a few things to say about that, whether it even makes sense to talk about laws of nature or what they are, what are the scientists actually discovering. So, Jonathan, I don't know how much of a human or a non-human you are when it comes to natural law.
So, yeah, I've written on this previously. Oops, sorry, my phone's just fallen over. I've written on this previously, and actually it's been so long since I've talked about this, but I find prescriptive and descriptive law discussions really freaking interesting and really important, and I'm glad you brought it up, actually, because, you know, this goes back to the idea of, like, validating your own fundamental assumptions is like the philosophical ideals that underpin the entirety of science, right? And so, like, for those who don't understand, right, let's use language. So we have dictionaries, and it used to be thought that dictionaries were prescriptive. So you'd open a dictionary, it tells you how to pronounce a word and how it should be pronounced and how it should be defined, right? But nowadays, dictionaries tend to be descriptive, which is if we evolve using a word in a particular way or spell it more often than not in this particular way, then the dictionary will change to adapt to the usage of that word. So they no longer prescribe how words should be understood or spelled, but they describe reality. Now, apply that to laws of nature. Are laws of nature fundamental aspects of reality that prescribe how things should be? So, for example, like, I don't know, a boson or whatever thing that Aaron talks about, some entity, like, should it behaves in this way because it has to adhere to this law, or is the law something that just describes how these things uniformly act, but there is no real law? I mean, law is a kind of like a way that we use to describe reality. It's a kind of a map we paint over, you know, to understand reality for us as humans, but it's not, we shouldn't confuse a map with the terrain. And actually, is there just a uniformity of behavior for you know, fundamental particles, for example? And then you start saying, well, maybe there has to be uniformity. My argument, I wrote something called the an essay called The Argument from Format, which is to say that if you didn't have uniformity of behavior of fundamental particles, you couldn't have reality. So if like 1 in 10 particles just decided to go down a pub and have a beer, or like turn left instead of right, or whatever, if there was that degree of randomness, now we can talk about, this is one of my arguments against like random interpretations of quantum, but I'm more of a deterministic sort of person. Like if you don't have uniformity, like reality would literally break down. You'd have a decoherence of reality. It has to be uniform just to exist.
I just want to throw a couple of ideas, because actually you would be quite surprised, and we'll use Aaron here, that actually the breaking of uniformity and particularly symmetry is why reality is here. It's a very funny thing. So, but I wanted to add the word law. I mean, we use that, the law of gravity, the laws. Actually, and correct me, Aaron, if I'm right on this one here. The scientific world is getting away from that word, from using that word, the law. They're using theory, because they want to emphasize how provisional science is. And the word law means it's fixed. It cannot be looked at in a different way. So these were archaic words or expressions that the scientific world is trying to get away from using. And the second thing is the conformity of reality. My argument is actually no. It's the other way around. We have the same amount of matter and the same amount of antimatter at some point. And 1 billion, I think, 1 billion particle. There was 1,000,000,001. And that broke the symmetry, and then it created the residue of matter that we all in here, and as well as the asymmetry of time that provides the arrow of time where you think the future is yet to happen. So a lot of what we call real was not an accident, but was because it's an emergent from a breaking of some symmetry of some sort. Would you agree with that, Aaron?
So let me just start with like the use of the word law. It is actually rather anciently used. We actually can even find like Roman era natural philosopher folks using that kind of language to describe nature. So yeah, it has a lot of antiquity, and that language also was very much picked up in the scientific revolution. Talking about the laws of nature, it usually also given a theological dimension, that these are the laws put into nature by God that everything has to follow. How much are we using the language now? I see the word law used plenty in physics. So we talk about like the law of conservation of energy, the laws of thermodynamics. Maybe it's more that in the non-physics world that there's less use of law, because especially in biology, you come up with a law and then you find like 10 more exceptions. It's so much messier. There are some laws in biology. So, for example, the Hardy-Weinberg law for in genetics, that law language is used, but it's also from a mathematical demonstration of things.
It's a problem because it implies a lawgiver as well, and I think people want to kind of move away maybe from that idea too. But anyway, just throw that in there.
Yeah, there's that aspect as well of when you have a lawgiver and such. And yeah, whether the laws are being prescribed, described, if they are somehow like inevitable from more fundamental things, or they're just kind of like enough statistical accumulation that it looks like it points in a certain direction. I'm wondering to what degree maybe some laws are Humean and some laws are non-Humean, but I have not done the hard work to figure that out. It's like this stuff is like hard, man, and you got to be like.
What about the emergence of reality from kind of non-conformity or breaking of symmetry?
I don't know anything about that myself. Like I'd need to think long and hard about that, and whether it sounds speculative or not. I don't know what evidence there is for what you're saying. So that's a big old can of worms.
Well, at least from our fundamental physics, we can see, yes, that there had to be broken symmetries at certain points, so that way we can have anything. The fact that the Higgs boson actually has a particular some of its particular values is because of the early symmetry breaking when the universe cooled down enough from its hot, dense state approximately 13-ish billion years ago. And yes, I know how many years ago it was because I was there. Okay, I'm not quite that old. Yeah, I'm working on it. I'm working on it. Nonetheless, I do, of course, wonder to what degree that we're going to figure out how we can get more of the fundaments from reality from just enough random stuff poking together that all happen to be pointing in the right direction, so that way they group together to give us enough uniformity to make the universe as we see it. But that's a weak thought I have, nothing well demonstrated.
Yeah.
Again, maybe we should also talk perhaps about what are the limits of philosophy, because I think it's fair to say there are things that science can't investigate well. And I'm just also trying to look from the point of view of those who say philosophy is done, what things can't philosophy do? And that might also help us figure out what areas should science or philosophy focus on.
But does that go back to the idea of like when imagine being born into nothingness, into like a vacuum with no sensory data? Like philosophy you can't do anything. Like there's I think philosophy is coextensive, isn't it? Our observation and all the data of the universe around us. I think we use philosophy on that. But we can't have philosophy without it either. I think there's a coextensive relationship between. But then I don't think they're two separate things. Like I've said before, just science is a part of philosophy. So this is just how these are all tools to investigate reality.
I want to bring a very pressing issue, and I think it is going to help our conversation today. And one of the things that makes me really proud of the United States of America. President Trump is the first president to take a cognitive test, and he succeeded multiple times. Apparently, there were 4 pictures put in front of him: a shark, a duck, a lion, and a bear. And they asked him which one is the bear, and he successfully, and in a weird, crazy way. I mean, that's like a genius level. Like we're talking 100 Mensa level, 140. He always
He's an amazing man.
the bear. Yeah. What would you say to that?
I mean, science is telling us that he is the greatest, and this is the where science is clearly able to do some philosophical legwork here by telling us he is the greatest, most bigly, amazingest man, president on Earth.
Sorry, I had to show Aaron because his facial features are quite telling.
I'm more curious if the current head of the federal government is also proving a hypothesis from The Simpsons. I don't know if they ever named it, but it would have been Burns syndrome, where Mr. Burns has every disease in the world, including several diseases only discovered in him. But because all of those diseases actually can't attack the body, they basically all cancel each other out. And I'm wondering if a similar thing might be happening with a person who
he's got all the vices in the world, and they're all like vying for privacy.
And of course, when you talk about him being 100 level Mensa or what have you, it makes me want to put my own head in a vice. But again, this is such self-harm is not going to make the country better. I will do my best to make America. I'm not going to say great again, just better than it was yesterday.
And I wrote a book.
Absolutely. Well, which is more than he could do. I mean, he didn't even write his book, and apparently he never read it either. He's never read his own ghost written book. So there you go.
Oh my God!
Yay for knowledge.
We are at I don't know what is happening to the world at the moment, but it seems to be. It's not just Trump. There are multiple states heads around the world. Instead of a state head, I call them dickheads around the world, like literally. What is
But
going
there is a
on?
connection there. There's a connection there. So what happens when you eschew the use of rationality and empirical data? So, for example, if you're going to sit there, like Trump has just, and sorry to be political here, but actually it does pertain to the conversation. So, for example, if you're saying, right, we're building loads of data centers, we've got AI, we need loads of energy, plus, climate change, environmental issues. So we need to get energy from wherever we can, and then you contract to build a load of wind farms, and then he's now bribing companies like Total Energy $1 billion of taxpayers' money not to build a wind farm that they've contractually agreed to build, and now he's done that like 30 times over. Now, so essentially, you're saying I am not going to be bothered with what science is telling us, and that is just supremely dangerous. And this is kind of like, it's almost like he's got a religion, but it is not religion, because his ideology is grifting, lining his own pockets, and pleasing the people around him, who I think are fairly evil, and pleasing lobbyists from the fossil fuel industry, for example. So this is where you have a tension between science and empirical data and ideology. Like in the old days, it would be a tension between science and religion, where someone would say, "Oh, the Earth is only 6,000 years old," and you're like, so we've got the same situation here, where we've got the data. The data is pretty much in. If you know what you're talking about, you would agree that this data tells us this, and then you can just bury your head in the sand and not believe data. And I think the problem with the reality these days is it's very easy not to believe that which is blatantly obviously true. And there are people who would be happy to follow you along with that, and you can go and find places on the internet that would support this kind of anti-scientific approach to reality. And I think that's exceptionally dangerous for humanity. End of rant.
Absolutely. So I'll give Aaron.
If I may come up with another slightly political rant, but I will take us into the past, the good old days of the Bush administration. Yeah, I never knew I would be saying that phrase ever.
Yeah.
I remember when I was back in college at this time, and I was taking classes on Plato with my university professor there. And I remember her talking about how much she's particularly despised an interpretation of Plato coming from Leo Strauss, a philosopher, theologian sort of person, early, mid 20th century, basically arguing that there are esoteric things that you can read into Plato or out of Plato. And apparently the administration at that time really loathed Straussian interpretations because it allowed them to get whatever they wanted out of Plato to justify their foreign policy. And I think this is the sort of thing where people can look to and say, here is the problem with philosophy, because if you do enough mental gymnastics or masturbation or gymnastics while mentally masturbating, that you get absurd conclusions to whatever it is you're going for, and it looks convoluted, and most people just look at that giant mess and they're like, I don't even want to participate in that. And I can understand why then that might create a visceral reaction. And I would say, well, that's an example of doing philosophy poorly. In the same way, if one does science poorly, if one looks at astrology and thinks that should somehow denigrate the scientific process, I would say seeing people do shit philosophy for their own crummy ends should not be a reason to throw out an entire discipline.
That's such a good point, Aaron. And like garbage in, garbage out, like Gigo, whatever, like garbage in, garbage out. Like you put poor data into your function machine, you're going to get poor data or conclusions out. And if you do bad philosophy, then you can use science badly. Or if you do bad science, then good philosophy can end up doing bad things as well. So you need good philosophy and good science to get you to a good place, and it's very problematic when you have the bad versions of either.
And you go to the bad place.
I'm going to introduce a couple of people so we can start getting some questions. And I'm very sorry, I know a few people disappeared from the panel ever since we talked about Trump. Looks like they were avid supporters, so I'm really, really sorry to hurt your feelings about Trump. I know he's a handsome dude. But we are going to. By the way, we have Magid, Prince, and Ahmed. Magid is pronounced in the Egyptian way. The classical Arabic we say Majid, but for very funny, the Arabic accent, the way we say the word G, the letter G in Egyptian accent is we pronounce it Gi, like Hebrew, because Hebrew does not have the J sound; they have the G sound, they have the Gi sounds. And looks like the Egyptians and the Hebrews, it's kind of an indication that the Exodus truly happened because of the uncanny similarity between the two letters. Yeah.
No. Aaron just did. Aaron wrote a huge a chapter on the etymology of the name Moses, doing some original scholarship and looking at both Egyptian and Hebrew linguistics, and he had to learn both languages to some degree to do this. So there's a really good chapter that in our forthcoming book that is quite original scholarship. But anyway.
Yes, if you need some help sleeping and you want to learn about the history of the ayin in ancient Egyptian and how it eventually drops out in Coptic, I'm your man.
There you go. That's how cool he is.
For people wondering of my accent, it's an Irish accent. So I'm an Egyptian, was born to an Egyptian father and Irish mother. So I've got an Irish twang. However, it's been watered down because of years of living abroad. So it's a bit of a mishmash of many accents at the moment. But I want to say hello to Magid, and was hoping to hear a question that is sort of links the conversation quite neatly. Hi, Magid. How's it going?
Good morning, all. From here, I don't know. Some people are good evening, but I have a question for Aaron. Big fan. Give me a post print update on the religion alien book. Do we know anything more that would be interesting to hear? And going in the same direction of the book, because I know what's in the book.
Okay. Well, I guess
there has been a lot of talk about it lately.
Okay. So first, just quickly give background to everyone else. One of the books that Jonathan and I worked on was about the intersection between the existence of extraterrestrials and what that might do to religions. Basically, how compatible would it be? How expected is it on there? And of course, how plausible is it that there is life, especially intelligent life, out there? Since our book came out, there has actually been some interesting science trying to answer the question how likely life came to exist elsewhere in the solar system, how likely is life to exist elsewhere in the galaxy, in ways that kind of pull in opposite directions. Like, there's been recent evidence from Mars that has increased the chances that there was past life on the planet. No one's saying it's proven yet, but the best evidence so far has come to light since then. I don't know enough of the details to say how good it ultimately is or how well it'll hold up, but that's one thing that's kind of cool, that the chances that life existed on Mars is now higher today than it was just a couple years ago. Conversely, I've also seen some people now pushing back if Europa could possibly have life in its oceans. Europa is one of the moons of Jupiter. We've been able to determine that it has liquid water underneath its frozen surface, and everyone wonders, hey, if it's being kept warm by things like thermal vents, the sorts of places that might have originated life here on Earth, could there be things swimming around in the waters of Europa? There's a researcher I've come across who's now been trying to push back on that. I don't know the science well enough to say how well it will stand up, but hey, one line of evidence showing the chances of life elsewhere in the solar system has gone up, another one saying it's gone down. Other people arguing that, hey, the fact that we're orbiting a yellow sun might actually further indicate that life in the galaxy is rarer than we thought, because most of the stars are lower mass red stars. And one of the issues with lower mass stars is to be in the habitable zone, those planets need to be closer to their star, which means they're more likely to be tidally locked, that one side will constantly face that star. And then you may not be able to have the sorts of environment that would be conducive to the growth of life, because one side would be baking, the other side would be freezing. And the evidence that people can point to that it's unlikely life exists around there is, if you were just to randomly pull a marble out of a jar, you're more likely to pick a marble out that is more common than less common. So if you got a jar full of colored marbles, you pull out a blue marble at random, your first thought is, okay, there might be more blue marbles than other colored marbles. And so the fact that we're around a yellow star, and yet most of the stars out there are actually red dwarf stars, the fact that the star that the marble that we pulled out was ours kind of suggests that there may not be as many life-bearing worlds around those more common stars, which means fewer of the stars are plausible habitable solar systems, which means the chances of life elsewhere in the galaxy may have gone down. But again, this is a lot of extrapolation from one data point. So
what's great about that book as well, Aaron, if I can say that our book that we've written ourselves is great. It's a bit self-congratulatory, but it is, in fact, it does pertain to this debate, which is actually you do some original scientific calculations in the book, so that there is actual genuine science. There's a lot of reliance on scientific work, but also it's a lot of philosophy. And this is where the book is called Aliens and Religion, Where Two Worlds Collide. But actually, there's two worlds here colliding, which is a world of philosophy and a world of science, if you are going to differentiate those two ideas, which I've already said is kind of defunct as an idea. But I think what we do in that book is we marry science and philosophy together in this perfect unison, where we can all be happy with the stuff we're reading. That's my interpretation.
For the sake of the conversation as well, I'm doing a podcast series on TikTok with a colleague of mine by the name of Naveen. It's almost akin to Bill Bryson's book, A Short History of Nearly Everything. So we've taken all the way from the Big Bang, and the very next episode is abiogenesis. So what we're doing, instead of hard science, we're doing kind of a Carl Sagan approach to science. So we put it in a story.
One of your commenters, Adam, I think from Lebanon, but looking by the flag, says there is no kind of life outside of Earth, and of course, there's just something that you have probably no epistemic right to say. You literally just cannot say that is the case. Now, you can believe it, but it wouldn't be a justified belief. And so what we do is we look statistically at what the chance of that, and in order to do that, you want to also have some kind of grasp of how big the universe is in order to know the frequency. If the universe is infinite, for example, then to say there is no life out there is just a mere assertion that's definitely utterly unjustifiable. But even if it's like mahusively big, like the probability of life out there is, in my opinion, is almost certain. So the question is, how much life and what kind of life and so on and so forth. And we go and look into all of these ideas in the book.
Once you plug in infinity, then the emergence of life doesn't become a statistical impossibility. It becomes
a certainty.
It has to happen.
Yeah. I run the numbers in our book. So I, take not the Schrodinger equation. That's another equation that's nice, but the Drake equation. And instead of plugging in individual numbers, I put in probability distributions based on our knowledge or lack of knowledge for the various parameters. So it's actually probably one of the most scientific uses of the Drake equation to date. Plug. And I also limit the chances of life existing in the universe to the observable universe, because you plug in infinity, then life becomes guaranteed. So is there life elsewhere in the observable universe? And based on those distributions I plug in, it's a near certainty. The real question, though, is, are there any other intelligent civilizations in the Milky Way galaxy? And my sim is basically pretty much at 50-50. We can't say one way or the other at this point. We might be alone in the galaxy. We might have neighbors. We don't know, and we don't have the ability to check right now because our technology can only have any plausibility of detecting radio signals stupidly close. And when I say stupidly close, I mean it could be hundreds of light years away, but when you have a galaxy that's over 100,000 light years across, it's stupidly close where we can look. And then, of course, our galaxy is just one of hundreds of billions in the observable universe. So, the fact that we haven't been able to, phone anyone in our local neighborhood should not tell you that the neighborhood is empty.
Absolutely.
100,000 light years is nothing.
Tell me, Aaron, about the possibility of life on the star of Bethlehem, since we shamelessly plug in.
Well, the Star of Bethlehem would have to be alive because of the way it moves around. So it's clearly a living being. So it can, hover around and stop over and point out individual houses in a local village. So that's my way to bring it all together. And while I'm saying something that might sound absurd, there are ancient commenters that basically say that the star was an angel. And so angels are a kind of living being. They're not biological per se. Well, actually, I'll even take that back. Considering the quote unquote fallen angels in Genesis 6 can come down and mate with human women, they got to have at least some genetics.
These are you referring to the Nephilims, yeah?
Yes.
Yeah. Crazy world we live in. Fantastic world. Good as a movie, though. I'd love to watch the movie.
You can watch the movie. It's called Noah, with directed by Aronofsky, and that's.
I love Darren Aronofsky. He's brilliant. Darren Aronofsky.
Yeah.
He's just Have you watched Mother?
Yeah, and if I remember correctly, I think the rock creatures from that movie are the offspring of the angels and women. I'm half remembering that right now.
Yeah. I just watched an Aronofsky film recently. Was it Caught Stealing? Or there's an Aronofsky film that was anyway, carry on.
The last one I watched was The Whale by Brendan Fraser, and that was brilliant as well.
Yeah, I've not seen that, but I know it.
Make amends.
All right, cool. So we've got thank you, Maggot. We're gonna take we've got Prince Ahmed and Mazen. So Prince and Ahmed are moderators in on my channel, and they're very, very nice folks. Hey, Prince, how's it going?
All good. Hi, Hani. Hello, Professor Adair and Mr. Pearce.
Hello.
It's nice to hear you all. I have a question. I came across a paper in produced in 2013. It's about philosophy de-disciplined. I'm not aware if you've heard of it, but I could share what it contains. It was written by Robert Fordman from the I think, let me see.
Prince, did you say philosophy de-disciplined?
Yes, philosophy de-disciplined. He Robert Fordman, who's a philosophy academic, particularly interested in interdisciplinarity. It's not mine. Sorry. Yeah. So Robert suggested that philosophy may need to be de-disciplined. As he describes it, he describes the process in the paper as like in a number of ways. As for instance, philosophy need to develop new courses in working with other disciplines, in applying for sponsored research at public science agencies, or training undergraduates and graduates to work outside professional philosophy. And this paper was in response to a survey, quite important survey, that took place in 2010 across over 500 departments of philosophy in North America.
Is that the 2009 Phil Papers survey? Which has been redone since then. Actually, interestingly, if it is, sorry to interrupt, but yeah, that's a huge survey. Carry on.
Yes, it is. In this survey, got quite a good return of over 200 universities' responses, and it focused. It was like a survey focused on questions in the area of curricula, funding, and the design of the courses and stuff like that.
All right.
The results of the survey was kind of like a surprise. A surprise in some part. For example, funding was fine. I mean, it was kind of stable or has increased over the years. So there was no issue with funding for philosophy departments, but when it comes to curriculum, it was like it wasn't kind of like improved or kind of has progressed in a way to help students, undergraduates, and or even graduates to find job prospects outside of academia. And in response, Robert Fordman, he actually produced this paper and also wrote a book recommending that philosophy departments should kind of look forward to create new courses, interdisciplinary courses with other fields. He suggested introducing like the term field philosopher, for example, applied ethics as kind of a new field, like mainstream in studying philosophy, I wonder, yeah.
Just to get the gist of this, this is obviously in response to, sounds like that philosophy and philosophers, almost like that free-spirited hippie that wanders without any discipline and boundaries and borders. And it's time to put this into the proper academic realm where philosophers are academically responsible in front of society in terms of producing and working on some stuff that is tangible that we're working on and we know what it is, and as opposed to a free roaming philosopher with a pipe on a lazy boy trying to wonder about whether reality exists or not.
But he has a love for the field, and he acknowledges how important the field has been. In his conclusion, he put it that way. He thinks that philosophy and humanity in general should never become disciplines. He thinks that, and he has like a theoretical reason for that. He thinks that disciplines embody a regional ontology, with each working within unquestioned boundaries. So he thinks that discipline, like as a discipline, has to be usually works within.
So he's arguing against it. Hence the title. De-discipline means he's arguing for.
Yes.
I've got quite a bit to say on this, if I may. Sorry, have you finished your idea, Prince? Yeah.
Sure.
So it's funny.
It's not my idea.
Well, like what you were expounding. Yeah, it's funny enough. I was watching a debate last night because I did the extent of my prep for this was just watching a debate on science. Has science killed philosophy? Right, and someone talked exactly about this and about demarcation within philosophy. And I talked about this right at the beginning. I mentioned in my introduction that in philosophy, you get these really niche areas where people have this expertise in one particular area, but it doesn't really stretch out to anywhere else. And that's not really how it used to be in philosophy. This is quite a modern phenomenon, as far as I understand it, where you get really specialized and then stay in your own sort of little castle and don't expand out. Whereas like the scientists, I think it was Cavoli on there, this I don't know, particle physicist or something, he was saying actually we always try and get as the initial kind of course elective on the course to people to do philosophy of science. So in order to do science, we need to actually stretch out to understand the philosophy of science and then apply some of these skills and tools to the work of science. But likewise in science, you have these false demarcation lines where, and we kind of talked about this in terms of science being part of philosophy, but actually I was trying to make this case that actually we shouldn't really have these demarcation lines, that this is just, these are all tools with which we deal with reality. And there is a usefulness to be able to use the tools of philosophy and apply them to all other different areas. And I think that is, I mean, critical thinking is obviously very, very prevalent for being able to properly evaluate anything. But to talk about applied ethics, we need to understand moral philosophy in order to understand how to program a self-driving car so it doesn't run at if it's got a choice. If we're living in a smart city, does this car hit an 80-year-old woman at the end of her life that might have terminal cancer, or does it hit a 5-year-old kid over there, or like a 35-year-old working person in this particular job? Like, how does it make, or does it try not to have to differentiate between people? Maybe it's better to think morally in a kind of non-discriminatory term. But all of this is philosophy. But if you're programming a vehicle, then hang on, you need to have some understanding of so on and so forth. The point is that I would completely advocate for, or at least for, you need niche experts who really drill down on a particular subject to the nth degree, but you also need the ability to be a polymath and to have a great understanding of several subjects, or apply one subject to another subject. I think that's eminently sensible.
Just to tag along with that, in some ways, I mean, this might be just a good argument that there are issues with the academic institution there, because you could become a philosopher, and my understanding, like a fair number of philosophers will also spend a lot of time just like publishing on the history of philosophy. There's huge discussions about keep going back and forth. What did Hume exactly mean in his arguments about miracles? These might be historically interesting, but do we give a damn about it? Because it's still the case. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. That's true whether or not Hume articulated it perfectly or not. So spending a huge amount of resource to that from the philosophy department and calling that philosophy might seem wasteful and distracting from, hey, how do these philosophers go out and create more general worldviews for us to construct and help guide our decision processes if all that brain power is being put into things that might better belong in, say, the history departments. So that I can see as an
you could apply science to itself there. You could apply science to this by saying, well, but again, you have to do philosophy. You say, what do we want out of education? Like, what's the point of education? Right. And so, like with anything moral, I would argue you should have a goal-orientated sense of morality. So you set your goal out. Well, why do we go to university? Why do we want to learn things? Is it for the fun of it? Is it a sense of curiosity? Or is it to get jobs? Is it to make society better? So whatever your goal is, then you say, well, if that's our goal, let's use science to look at how best curricula are created in order to achieve this kind of goal. So there is an element that you could use empirical data to inform how to develop curricula.
I just want to
add, the purpose of education is to create people who can just spell their names, so that way when we have them working on the machines to increase the riches of the capitalists, that is of course the ultimate purpose of education.
Of course. Yeah.
I just want to add something to this conversation here about the demarcation and the taxonomy of things. The reality is continuous. It's a continuum.
Yeah.
The physics leads to chemistry, to biochemistry, to biology, to conscious living things, that leads to the creation of art, religion, the ways of doing things, and all of that it's continuous in such a way. The barriers that we create arbitrarily, it's an arbitrary a divider in the sand, so we can actually we talked about the human brain and its inability to absorb huge amounts of data at the same time. So we must dissect. We must look at
I can't believe you're coming up with this.
Why?
Because I was going to talk about this. This was one of my sorry to interrupt you, but one of my favorite thought experiments in the whole of philosophy is the Socrates paradox. So the Socrates paradox is a problem of demarcation, right? Where you have a sand dune and you take a grain of sand off the sand dune and you keep doing that. And with each grain, you say, is it still a sand dune? It's like, of course it is. You take it off, and at no point does this mound of sand not become a sand dune, because there's no definable demarcated sense of sand dune to not sand dune. And so what the paradox is, you end up with no sand grains of sand, and it's still a sand dune because you haven't been able to define when it didn't become one. So this problem of demarcation exists in all sorts of areas when you've got continua, for sure. So for example, what's the difference between, I don't know, an embryo, a fetus, a newborn, a baby, an infant, a teenager, an adolescent, an adult, a pension, or whatever. And these are all grey areas. Like, when do you have a right to vote? Well, here it's 18, here it's 16, here it's 21, drink, blah, blah, blah. And what we do, you're exactly right, is we demarcate these things for ease of being able to, categorize and put things in boxes and make laws and rules and have society. But our moral laws are quite grey in certain areas, and any kind of demarcation is really difficult. Physics, chemistry, and biology, they're kind of false demarcations there. And actually, physics is a part of chemistry, is a part of biology, right? They're all one underpins the other.
That's why,
the
Jonathan,
same.
I understand why philosophers tend to be we think free-spirited hippies. But when you are looking at the base reality of things, the wholesome picture, not reality at the quantum physics base or at the classical, because these were be specialty within that field. But when you have somebody is thinking, what is real? What is beautiful? What is right? These are normative values that requires a big picture view. And therefore, if you try to restrict it by certain rules and demarcations, you might actually kill the essence of what.
Yeah, you could. It might be too reductionist. Yeah. But I would take issue with the idea that philosophers should be like free. I mean, I think philosophers are generally quite anal and pernickety about words. It's like, no, actually, it means I'm going to be really particular about this idea because garbage in, garbage out. So we've got to get the minutiae right here if we're going to start doing all this argumentation that goes up to here. So yeah.
True,
but anyway,
true, very.
Yeah. You see that in the philosophy survey as well. I had the 2020 survey up to look at things.
Yeah, I think his survey was actually not the Phil Papers one, though. The Phil Papers 2009 was about what philosophers think. His one was talking about the makeup of curricula. I don't know if it's part of the same one, but anyway, I might have got that wrong.
I was actually just going to be pointing out their persnickety-ness, because for so many of the survey questions, there's here's two answers and then there's other. And you just see this rush to other for so many of these categories.
Yeah. Well, actually, I can't say this, I can't say that, because technically, that's philosophy.
Fantastic. So, can we, Prince? Are you okay with we move on to Ahmed, because we've got a few other questions coming our way?
Cheers, Prince.
I may ask for the mic in another time for another question.
Oh, absolutely. Ahmed, how are you, mate?
How are you, Annie? Hello, everyone.
Good. What's your question?
It's not necessarily a question, but I don't know if it is how I understand the subject, and I don't know if you agree or not, but this is my point of view. I agree with Jason when he said, the debate is not.
Sorry,
even...
who's Jason?
Jonathan, I presume.
Jonathan. Okay.
We all agree with Jason, but Jonathan is debatable.
Yeah. That's controversial.
Yeah, there is no real debate between the two. It's just a misconception. Part of it is a stereotype about philosophers.
Yeah,
there is a popular culture distortion. Philosophy is shown as an abstract debate, not technical or structured work. There is part of it is lack of exposure. People rarely see formal philosophy as form of logic, philosophy of science, or epistemology. I think this is the main issue here.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
You, Jonathan.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and people don't understand what philosophy is or how actually wide-ranging philosophy is. So you could talk about modal logic, or you could talk about symbolic logic and stuff like notation, logical notation that I just don't know how to do, right? Because that's not my niche, and so it's so broad, and therefore the application. When you start thinking of how much philosophy underwrites, say, computer science, and then computer science underwrites, AI or computation or whatever, technology. Philosophy can be insanely useful, and I think the idea of applied philosophy is particularly cool. When talking about morality with self-driving cars or whatever it is. I think people probably have misconceptions of what philosophers are and what they do, but then there is awful lot of mental masturbation as well. So let's face it.
I agree. And philosophy is still forming how we understand science and how we, use it in our daily life. So, there's no real debate for me. Thank you.
Yeah, and every time you have an ought statement. So for example, like I do geopolitics mainly these days, right? And I try and make it very clear that whenever you're doing politics, you're doing philosophy. Like politics is philosophy, because politics is an ought statement, but just writ large across society. Normally we talk about ethics and morality pertaining to individual actions, but actually, societies and policies enacted by governments are moral declarations across society. So it's like super important moral philosophy, and we all get exercised, we all get really angry about governments making X and Y decisions because we're all moral creatures. Governments are doing morality, politics is morality, and I get really annoyed because when people do politics, or they're arguing down here, it's like, oh, we shouldn't have this tax, or we shouldn't have this rule, or we shouldn't do this, and they look at it down at this level, but I talk about goal-oriented morality. I've already mentioned this several times. It's like this. You can only argue about whether this is good or valuable or decent as a policy if you have an understanding of where you want society to go. And what we don't do enough of is what kind of, like Hanny was talking about, the overall kind of holistic view of reality. Like, what should the world look like? We should be striving to have a really sensible vision of, and the problem is that's really difficult, right? Because that's almost too big for our minds to be able to cope with. But we need to work out what kind of world we want to live in. And then once you work out the world you want to live in, you then work out the best way to get there using science and using morality, and you have a goal-orientated moral vision and journey. But we sort of argue in the weeds without having a clear understanding of the whole picture. That's gone off on one, but sorry, you just made me go off on one.
Well, fair enough.
I have another final question. Yeah. Let's move on.
No. I'll take your question, but I just want to make a point on the point of intellectual masturbation, and I've got a confession to make here. My wife caught me.
Leave it, Hanny.
No, honestly, and I was quite embarrassed. So my wife caught me the other day peeking at a Baruch Spinoza's site, and it's quite embarrassing. Yeah.
You're not dabbling in agnosticism, are you? Stop! You're giving me up for agnosticism, you bastard! Yeah.
Go on, Ahmed. Take one last question, and we move on to Mazen.
Yeah, the final question is about how the science success bias is into the equation. How it comes into the equation. If anyone here is wanted to talk about it. Science is working for us. It's giving us results. That's why you need
repeatable, retestable, decent peer-reviewed process, but also just repeatable data all the time to try and get rid of the bias. Human nature means that even when we're trying to do the very best science, there's still going to be caveats applied. Aaron had talked much more eloquently about this, but the process hopefully should be decent and robust enough that it can deal eventually with the biases that we bring to bear with scientific endeavor.
All right, thank you.
But Aaron will be able to much better answer that.
I will note just very quickly that philosophy also can be quote unquote repeatable in that a good philosopher will lay out their argument, their logic, their premises, and that is something that does give at least some success to philosophy, that it can advance. And just as a comparison, because what could you do otherwise? Well, how about someone who just says they had a dream and that's why they know things? So much of theology is just that this was revealed to me in some sort of way, and it becomes impossible to interrogate those things. Even in philosophy, we'll say, well, this intuitively seems right, and then we can have arguments about, well, where does this intuition come from?
Yeah,
How reliable is it? And that can at least then be, we can at least be introspective about. It's of course slower, harder. The possibility space you have to investigate with, especially intuitions in philosophy, is gargantuan. But yeah, in some ways, you could say that the reason science is successful is that it's able to get better data than what philosophers can in their areas of interest.
I think I've just spotted our next chat, and I'm loving this so much, guys. I think we should do this every few weeks, like a coffee shop type of approach. And I think the next topic, because I know that Jonathan is gagging for it, I want to dismantle God, but not in a way that it's colloquially it's approached right now, where Christians are dumb and stupid and Muslims are just, horrible people. I want to take this idea, which is, I think it's important. A lot of people thought about it for many years until now, and I want to subject it to abductive logic and Bayesian analysis and stuff like that. I want to know the truth. I can face the reality if there is a creator. I'd like to know. I'm quite curious about it.
Do you know what I find interesting at the moment, Hanny? Like, I've been doing geopolitics for 4 years now as a YouTube channel, and I am deep into the weeds of global geopolitics. And I can tell you fairly categorically that God is essentially absolutely irrelevant. Absolutely irrelevant. Now, you can talk about the cultural differences between countries and how God plays a part in terms of how different societies, like the Middle East, for example, like Iran versus Shia Muslims versus Sunni Muslims, and how that can have an effect from a cultural point of view geopolitically, right? But in terms of like the existence of God, that plays absolutely no part in any of the political the actual existence of God, not certain demographic like representations, but the actual belief in God is absolutely freaking irrelevant. And it is quite interesting that, having spent like 15 years writing books on whether or not God exists, like I've got to a point where it's like God is actually functionally fairly irrelevant for the everyday goings on in the world. And when you have these horrific things, and then I just think, well, if God did exist, where the freaking hell are you? Because you're kind of needed right now.
Well, you kind of move to like an apathist kind of position. So even if God exists, then he is like a tit on a bull.
Well, yeah, even if God exists, it will be the philosopher's God that has no interaction with the world. So it's the same as atheism. So I see no functional difference between the philosopher's God, deism, and atheism. There's no difference. So it's just like, honestly, it's just like, there is so much really important stuff going on, and people are dying, and the world is changing in this way and that way, and it's pretty damned obvious to me, just from a prima facie intuitive point of view, that God doesn't exist, doesn't functionally play any part in the machinations of society.
Yeah, I remember a bit of a story about George Bush, and I wasn't quite sure if it's true or not, but it was kind of a joke at the time, at that 9/11, and George Bush was in a kindergarten telling a story to a few infants, and he was being told in his earpiece or whatever.
Yeah.
And
that
he said,
happened,
"Oh, sorry, I gotta hear what happens to the duck at the end of the story." He was and I'm not sure if this has happened or not, but it seems to me like God is.
He did carry on reading.
He carried reading, yeah. But it's almost like God seems to be concerned with minute little things.
So there's that meme, the idea. I mean, we've talked about, sorry to talk about masturbation again, but actual real masturbation now, not mental one. Like the idea that that's like bad, and that God is going to punish you for masturbating. There's a meme of like the Jesus God figure, bearded God figure, looking from outside the universe into like this small pale blue dot of a world, and that one person on the wall is like, "How dare you masturbate?" Like type thing. It's like, you think he cares? But you've got an entire universe of potential billions of life forms, and he gives a damn whether Joe Bloggs is having a bit of ham shandy. It's just like, yeah. The
other idea is God created us for a bit of we're kind of his porn,
But just a big game of Sims. That's what it is.
I think we should also note, when it does come to God and philosophy, I'm checking also over the 2020 Philosopher's Survey, and there is actually a majority opinion, a pretty strong majority opinion on this. About 67% of philosophers surveyed are atheist, and not even 20% affirm or lean towards theism. So yeah, the philosophers have pretty much gotten on board in terms of where there's a majority opinion on anything in philosophy.
Yeah, I think that actually went down from the 2009 in terms of I think there's slightly more believers than 2009, if I remember correctly. But what's interesting there is there's a kind of self-selection thing.
Like the opposite. They have a side-by-side, and the swing is the opposite direction. Atheism actually went a little bit up. But the 2009 survey.
Right, it might be the free will one then I was thinking of that might have gone down marginally. I remember one of because I don't believe in free will and I don't believe in God, and I remember one of those two shifted negatively, but only not by much. But yeah, you got to be careful with that, because some people, it's not like religion. Yeah, there's self-selection issues there. So do you take up philosophy to prove your position? Like, so for example, lots of religious people go into philosophy in order to kind of justify their position type thing. And so it's not like philosophy is more likely to, it's complicated. There'll be loads of nuance. So I don't want to, you know where I'm going, Aaron, is the direction of causality there. But yes, I think there's
And I will say that to in some ways reiterate what Jonathan was saying, God is whatever we're going to say God needs to be for whatever the argument is at the moment, which just shows how much of a shit hypothesis it ever is, because it's not just trying to build a castle on sand. It's more building a castle on flour while the water is flowing through, washing everything away, and somehow claiming that you're the foundation to everything. It is monstrously absurd when you actually realize how many bald assumptions have to go into anything and claiming that is absolute truth, while the person down the road also claims absolute truth, and you can barely even agree on how to spell the word God.
Yeah. I haven't got too much time left, by the way, Hanny, because I've got a dwindling battery and children just about to return from school.
Have you got another, 10 minutes?
Yep. Let's do 10.
Okay.
It's not my limit as well, because I have a work meeting in a minute as well.
Okay, so we're going to finish between 10 and 15 minutes maximum. We'll take Mazen's then and Adam's questions. And hopefully, guys, we'll talk offline, but I think we should do something and we give it a name, we give it a brand, if you like, like a sort of a coffee shop approach to this. We take a topic and dissect it. We talk about it for an hour and open it up for questions for another hour. So maybe a 2-hour sort of session, and maybe like a fortnightly or a monthly.
Probably monthly for me, but yeah.
Yeah, monthly is a good thing. And that'll be quite wonderful, especially the books. We want to show the books. I mean, the books that I've read from you guys are wonderful. We want to sort of make people aware of these books. So maybe the next episode we will talk about God. We will demonstrate one of your books. The 30 Arguments for Against the Existence of God is a good one as well.
Yeah, I love that one. Yeah, it's one of my favorites. Nice, easy to read one as well. Packed full of some really good arguments. Got a lot of time for that.
It's written in a very funny language. What language is that?
Yeah, back to front language. Yeah, it's awesome.
It's magical.
Yeah. Do I need to mirror I don't know how to do that.
Yeah, it's all right. Well, you get to learn all these things later on, but people can guess.
You have to hold the book back.
That's it.
Or when they watch the video, because this is going to go on YouTube, by the way, so you can take so this stream, the recording of it goes on YouTube, and then you can take a copy and upload it into your channel later on. So
I'll do that. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So people, when they watch the stuff on YouTube, they can put it against the mirror and they can read the book's name.
Yeah.
All right. So I think Mazen was first, and then we take Adam, and then we can take final comments from everybody else. Hey, Mazen, how are you?
They've been waiting so long. They've lost the will to live.
I know. Well, that's the tick. I had people coming in and they were snoring already. Like, I don't know how they've even requested to come up, And you know,
I tend to do this to people.
Yeah, but it kind of proves astral travel. Yeah, you know, you can.
It's my chance, huh? I get to pay this time.
Okay, Adam, go for it, man. Maz's might be away.
Hello, guys. I want to use my original language, so I will speak in Arabic, and Hani will translate for you. Okay?
Cool, sounds good.
Okay, هاني عندي سؤالين. أول سؤال first question. هل الفلسفة والعلم أصلا يتضاربان يعني ولا هم أصلا كل واحد في مجال مختلف عن الآخر? This is the first question.
Okay, so Adam is asking whether there actually a contrast between the two disciplines in the first place, or is it made up, or are they, as well, this is my own word, Stephen Jay Gould said, a non-overlapping magisteria.
I mean, I would say I've argued that already, which is they're not just overlapping. One sits well inside the other. So science literally is one of the tools of philosophy, or one of the both tools and also disciplines of philosophy. So it sits. So you got philosophy, and you got all the different domains. And again, these will overlap to some degree. Then you've got epistemology, and then inside epistemology, you've got science. So science as a way of finding out more about the world through repeatable testing, scientific hypothesis. That is just a method with which we can find out about the world, which is epistemology, which is then part of philosophy. So I don't think there's a tension, because I think one just sits inside the other.
Agreed.
Agreed, Aaron.
Thank you. Second question.
فهمت
هاني
آدم؟
بما إنه
فهمت آدم
فهمت.
الإجابة؟ he
فهمت.
understood you guys. That's pretty good. I didn't need to
cool.
translate that.
So second question. ساينس العلم يبحث في المادة، لا يستطيع تجاوز المادة أبدا. أما الفلسفة تسأل أو تبحث في مجال لا مادي أساسا. فهل العلم سيأتي يوم يجيب على أسئلة أصلا لا يدرسها حتى نقول أن العلم ضرب الفلسفة، أم أن هذا مستحيل أصلا؟
Okay, he's saying well, science is as an epistemic tool looks into the world of matter, or the material. Philosophy goes beyond that. It can look at the material, but also the immaterial, the abstract world. Can science at any point stick its nose into the immaterial world and start to influence the world, the realm of the immaterial?
That's such a good question. That's a really good question. When you can look at this in several ways. So you can look at this in terms of physicalism and kind of non-physicalism, as in the domain of science. Like you have a belief, you have physicalists who will believe that everything is fundamentally physical, or materialists. There are issues with materialism against physicalism as a term. And then you could look at it in that way, or you can look at naturalism versus supernaturalism. And there was Jonathan Fishman wrote a paper on how science can test supernaturalism, because if something that is kind of inherently untestable actually has real world effects. So, the idea that if supernaturalism just doesn't do anything, if it doesn't affect the real world, then, it's nothing. What's the point? Don't need to bother about it. But if it actually affects the kind of real world, then you should be able to test it. So, for example, something like prayer, right? You should be able to test prayer to some degree at least. And in fact, they have done, and they've done, double-blind tests on prayer. And so I think when the abstract world or the non-physical world interacts with the physical world, if you believe something like that can happen, then in principle, science should have at least something it can say about it. I don't know if that fully answers the question, but it gives an answer to that question.
Fantastic.
Okay, thank you. My last question.
Aaron wants to add one thing.
Yeah. So there's two aspects I can think of, because in philosophy, like are objects such as mathematical objects or things in logic, do those exist as like metaphysical things? Now, because I take a philosophical position of nominalism, so that these things don't actually exist, and so in that way, science can't explore them as objects in any way, no matter what, because I don't think they exist as objects with a kind of ontology like that. Now, conversely, if we're talking about immaterial things like, spooky things, ghosts, angels, things like that, in theory, we could test them because people claim all the time, angel did X to this. God cured my cancer, or God gave my enemy cancer, or people are making claims all the time of supernatural things, doing things in the world that we see, smell, feel, experience. So in theory, yes, we can go and explore. The problem is, every time science has done that, it comes back and says, hey, there's nothing here. That failure has become a reason I'm a naturalist, because every time we have tried to use supernatural explanations or look for supernatural explanations, it comes back negative every single time.
اوكي
Fantastic.
انا سؤال اخير بس مش ما اطول عليكم، انا اسئلتي مختصره وادور. اول شيء
Okay. صوتك بعيد شوية يا آدم بس. Okay, Adam's got one last
الصوت واضح؟
question. Yes, go
هو
ahead.
بس مقدمه قبل سؤالي. نحن دائما نستخدم بالنظريات العلميه الارقام والمعادلات الرياضيه، فعليا هي مش موجوده اصلا. يعني المعادلات الرياضيه حتى نثبت نحن معادلات او فلسفه او نظريات علميه بنستخدم الرياضيات والمعادلات الرياضيه، فعليا هي مش موجوده. الارقام هذه والمعادلات هي شيء غير موجود اصلا، عم نستخدمه عشان نثبت فيه النظريات العلميه. هذا التعليل الاول. التعليل الثاني، بما انه الدماغ البشري هو مادي وعم ينتج معنا هذه الاسئله اللي المفروض ما تنسال، لانه هو عم يبحث شيء ما وراء الماده، هو ماده. فمن وين اجت هالاسئله اساسا لهذا الدماغ البشري المعقد جدا، اللي هو المفروض اذا كان هو نتاج مادي بحت ما يسالها؟ ليش الدماغ البشري عم يسال هاي الاسئله اللي اصلا ما لها داعي اصلا؟
Fantastic last question, I think. Mathematics being the epitome of the abstraction, and it's the one method that we can prove certain scientific theory that deals with the material world. And in the other hand, the material brain that is completely sort of made its corners and experiences made of matter and biological things, is able to produce questions about the immaterial. Why is that? Why is it not just confined in the material world the way it's made?
I think that there's needs to be a big conversation, which we don't have time for, about consciousness here and what consciousness is and what the ontology of consciousness is. So I'm like Aaron, we're quite similar in we're what's called conceptual nominalists, in that abstract ideas don't exist, we conceive them. But then what does it mean to have a thought? What is the ontology of a thought? And how do thoughts then interact with the material world? And so therefore, are thoughts part of the material world? That's why I was talking about how definitions of physicalism and materialism are sometimes problematic, because it depends whether you got like a monism, whereas everything is all one, and the physical and the mental are all parts of one system. And then the question is, well, what is contingent upon the other? So idealists would say that arguably the physical reality is secondary to mental reality, and actually our mental reality invents a physical reality, but the physical reality, some idealists would say, doesn't actually exist in the way we think it does. Whereas other people, like materialists, would say, well, actually the material reality has primacy, and on which consciousness is contingent. But then we also understand that experience is primal, as in there's a primacy to experience, like I explained earlier. But then how can you have that if it's secondary to material stuff? And so or these things coextensive. And so I think there are conversations here. I don't know I'm particularly answering the question, other than to say, this requires a massive conversation about the nature of consciousness. I think
looks like we're going to track them both to their sources, because I think this is where we're going to find the truth, where they stem from. Like to go all the way.
But this is one of the classic arguments, isn't it? Is as to where God's been pushed outside the universe and is left. What does God explain, right? And the last thing really is, some might say the soul. I mean, I don't believe the soul exists, but some might say the soul or consciousness or the start of the universe, right? Because we don't quite understand that scientifically yet, because science breaks down at that point. Then people go, oh, therefore God, right? But this is where we're at with kind of science and philosophy, which is what can't, we're back to the idea of like, what can't science explain? At the moment, consciousness. Although there is a lot of work being done on this, and some people will say, well, it will explain consciousness. Other people will say it can't explain consciousness, and there's no answer there yet.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much.
But Aaron, what does Aaron have to say about that?
Yeah.
Only thing I have to say is this will also intersect with what you think about the current level of consciousness or the impossibility of consciousness with artificial intelligences. And considering recent hoopla about Claude or Claudia, according to Richard Dawkins, that could be a discussion all on its own.
Yeah. And then you've got like panpsychism and the idea that mentality exists in all things, and all sorts of different like theories of consciousness. But anyway, that's for another day. Really great questions from Adam, though, by the way.
Yeah, fantastic.
Not that we particularly answered them.
Yeah.
Did he understand? Did he understand everything?
Yeah,
Adam.
But you didn't answer me about the numbers, the mathematics. Why we use the mathematic numbers and everything is not it's not material. So we work on unmaterial things to prove material things theory. How it's.
Well, I think that's just the nature of how we abstract ideas. So our map that we build up of reality, so we have real things, but to understand the real things, like counting, like to understand that there's 1, 2, 3, 4 objects there, we need to be able to have a language that we can use inside of our heads to understand that. And so we have a mental language. So I would adhere to mathematical formalism, which is this idea, if I'm correct in saying, it's been a long time since I've been looking at this, but it's conceptual nominalism, that actually numbers don't exist. And it's just a map that we create. We construct a map to understand reality, and that's what mental stuff is. But that we shouldn't. We also shouldn't confuse the map with the terrain, which is to say that though we create a map of reality in our heads, that isn't reality. That there is a reality that underlies that, and we shouldn't confuse the two. So then, like, is mathematics at the bottom of reality? Does that underwrite reality? Well, I would say mathematics is a language that we've invented. It's a bit like saying French is a basis of reality. Not quite, but there are behaviors, there are properties of reality that seem to be uniform. So the question then is, well, why is there uniformity? And we kind of touched on that. But my position would be that that abstraction is a very human thing to do. But I just think it's the way that I don't think there's a problem. It's the way that we understand reality.
Yeah, and even if mathematics are discovered, what could it be like easily the feature of reality? Like we know mathematics are deductive, and if deduction is part of reality, that's how things work. That's a feature of reality. Then creating a language that matches and maps into that reality is quite the next natural step. There is nothing here to worry about,
Yeah. I mean, this goes back to almost the Humean argument as well that we're having about, descriptive, prescriptive, or just the underlying ontology of reality, and whether, I could bore you with the argument from format again and talking about like uniformity, but I would possibly argue it's the only way it can be, because otherwise things decohere. But that regularity of existence we then translate into numbers and logic and whatnot. But the argument is whether numbers actually really underwrite, whether mathematics really underwrites that, or whether that's a language of understanding that reality, which is some other thing.
Yeah, agreed. Well, thank you so much, guys. I'm just going to stick around for another 5 minutes just to tell probably the Arabic world a couple of things that I'm about to do in the next day or so. So if you need to shoot for whatever reason, feel free to add your last comment and thank the audience.
Over to you, Aaron.
Well, again, thank you for having me again and boring people on different continents. It's the thing that gets me up in the morning.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, thank you very much, Annie, and thank you to your audience for being generous in allowing us to just have a very, a free-flowing conversation, more of a discussion, and I appreciate that. I am by no means an expert on any one particular area of this. So it's lovely to kind of move beyond just talking about where I normally talk about, which is like the existence of God, into these other areas that I think are eminently, absolutely fascinating. So I've really appreciated this. Thank you, mate.
Much appreciated, Jonathan. Thank you very much, and look after the kids. And I'm sure we'll chat later and over the next few weeks. Looks like the guys are getting addicted to that sort of unholy trinity.
Absolutely.
So the way to exit is just you just easily exit the application, and that will kick you out if you want to.
All right.
What, just like this?
Yes, just like this.
All right. I will also try to leave dramatically. Thank you again. Bye-bye.
Cheers, Aaron. All right. Okay, thanks everyone. I'm not sure if I should continue speaking in English now. Can anybody in the comments will tell me, please, if you're an English speaker? Because if no English speakers left, I will then chameleon myself and go into the other persona. So it looks like we've got just an Arabic audience at the moment. طيب ازيكم يا جماعة؟ ايه الاخبار؟ مازن طلع نام.
ويلكم باك بالعربي.
والشخصية بقى بتتغير خالص، والكلام كله بيتغير وكل حاجة بتتغير. بس طبعا اللي انا كنت بحاول اعمله النهارده ان في ديبيت اللي انتوا عارفينه الشهير بتاع اللي هو العلم انهى على الفلسفة. فانا جبت واحد عالم بيشتغل، راجل فيزيست عنده PhD في الفيزياء، وكان بيشتغل في سيرن اللي هو المعجل الجسيمات في اللي هو في سويسرا. لارج هادرون كولايدر. وجوناثان MS بيرس كان يدرس الفلسفة، راجل اكاديميك يعني في الفلسفة، والاثنين شغالين مع بعض وبيعملوا كتب مع بعض ومعتقدين تماما مفيش المشكلة بتاعتنا اللي هي المشكلة اللي موجودة بالذات على التيك توك ما بين المثقفين، يعني على ان بالذات من ناس معينه بتشتغل مثلا مهتمه بالمنهجيه العلميه او العكس، ان في صراع ما بين الاثنين، ان زي خناقه ميسي ورونالدو او خناقه وحيد سيف وسمير غانم، مين اللي بيضحك اكتر، اللي هي الحاجات اللي مش موجوده في ما فيش الكلام ده خالص. ان دول منطقتين الاثنين شغالين مع بعض متفاهمين تماما ما يقدمه العلم في منطقة الإبستمولوجي أو في نظرية المعرفة، ولكن الفلسفة تتعدى نظرية المعرفة. فيها حاجات عن الأونتولوجي، فيها حاجات عن الأخلاق والجماليات والحكم والقيم والتقييم الأشياء، دي تتعدى العلوم التطبيقية والطبيعية يعني. بس ده فكان الاتفاق بشكل كامل كل الموجودين وأنا معاهم إن لا، العلم لم ينهي على الفلسفة، ولكن الاثنين شغالين مع بعض وكلهم يضيف للآخر. الفلسفة تضيف للعلم، تعطي لها الإطار، والعلم التطبيقي بيعطي داتا ومعلومات للفلسفة عشان فيها تراجع بعض المناطق الأكسيوماتية أو المسلمات أو الاتجاه مثلا الأخلاقي في منطقة معينة بسبب معرفة جديدة نشأت من خلال أن العلم أدى بدخولها في هذه المنطقة، فبتخلي الفلسفة تراجع الأوراق وتعمل إعادة ترتيب أوراق. ففي تكامل وتفاضل الحقيقة ما بين أن المنطقتين، ما فيش صراع كما يعتقد الناس كثيرة على التيك توك بالذات في المتحدثين باللغة العربية ان في صراع ما بين محتدم ما بين المنطقتين. ما انا مش حاسس بيه خالص على الاطلاق. طيب مازن لو
عندي
انت
سؤال لك
اتفضل.
سؤال مازن شكله نايم عم يشخر. اصلا شو المعيار شو المعايير اللي اصلا فينا نقول على الانسان فيلسوف مثلا، او انه او عم بيطرح شيء فلسفي؟ شو المعيار؟
يعني في نوعين، اللي هو دارس فلسفة بشكل أكاديمي، يعني دخل ودرس الفلسفة بشكل أكاديمي، في ناس بتعمل، يعني مثلا درست فلسفة، أنا عندي ماجستير في الفلسفة ولكن لا أعمل بالفلسفة، ما اشتغلتش في الفلسفة. ففي فيلسوف أكاديمي بيدرس الفلسفة، في شخص مهتم بالفلسفة ومحب للحكمة ومحب للمعرفة ودرسها زي حالاتي أنا، ولكن لا يستخدمها في العمل. بستخدمها الحقيقة، لا أنا بستخدمها كل يوم، بس مش لا أدرسها مثلا. ده نطاق. وأنا أدعي أن كل ما يفكر في هذه الحياة بشكل أو بآخر هو شخص محب للفلسفة، هو ممارس للفلسفة، ولكن في طبقات، يعني في زي إيه ليفلز ليها. فأنا أعتقد أن أي إنسان يفكر في الحياة وفي مشاكل الحياة وفي أشياء لها علاقة بنظرية المعرفة وحقيقة الأشياء، إذا كان الحقيقة دي موجودة ولا مش موجودة، هو يقوم بممارسة الفلسفة.
يعني اي واحد فينا نقول عنه فيلسوف صغير.
يعني
اي
ممكن
انسان
نقول عليك
يفكر
مثلا
فيلسوف صغير.
ده لا، ده في مصر دي عندنا عيب، لكن انت بتتفلسف يا عم، ايه انت بتتفلسف عليا؟ ده
شكرا يا هاني،
شتيمة دي.
شكرا على وقتك الجميل، على
حبيبي
ضيوفك
يعني.
الحلوين.
الله يخليك.
نتمنى لك نهار حلو، او انت صار عندك
متشكر.
المساء يمكن بدك تنام. الله
انا
تصبح على خير.
12 ونصف صباحا بعد نصف الليل، بس انا عايز اقول بس قبل ما اعطي البرنس بقى الكلمة الأخيرة، ان بكرة الساعة 3 بعد الظهر عندي في بتوقيت استراليا، يعني 3 يعني حوالي 8 الصبح بتوقيت القاهرة. 8 الصبح بتوقيت القاهرة. هيكون ليا اللقاء مع ديف فارينا، اللي هو صاحب قناة بروفيسور ديف اكسبلينز. انا عامل الاعلان بتاعه على التيك توك، بس اللقاء ده هيكون على اليوتيوب مش على التيك توك، على اليوتيوب. ديف فارينا هو عنده قناة فيها حوالي 2 مليون مشترك، ساينس educator. هو راجل اصلا كيمست، وعمل المناظرة الشهيرة هو وجيمس تور، الكيميائي الشهير اللي هو الخلقي، اللي كان بيقول يعني أن الحياة، بداية الحياة بالشكل الكيميائي المعقد مستحيلة. والمناظرة الشهيرة بتاعته هو وجيمس تور، اسمه ديف فارينا. واللقاء موجود مثبت على القناة اليوتيوب. قناة اليوتيوب هي يا جماعة تحت العنوان اسمها Critical Faculty، موجودة على بروفايل تيك توك، اللي عاوز يشترك فيها قربنا على 50,000 مشترك. فاللقاء ده هيكون لايف مع ديف فارينا بكرة الساعة 8 صباحا بتوقيت القاهرة. اللقاءات في اللقاءات الإنجليزية، لما اللقاء اللي انتوا شفتوه ده يا جماعة على التيك توك، لما يروح على اليوتيوب بعد بضعة ساعات بتنزل الترجمة العربية لكل المحاورين. فانتوا بكل سهولة الناس اللغة الإنجليزية بتاعتها، وخدوها فرصة، يعني خدوها فرصة ملائمة. أنا الموضوع ده هيستمر، الموضوع ده كده مش، أنا المحتوى الإنجليزي هيزداد عندي على اليوتيوب مرة تانية وعلى التيك توك. وخدوها فرصة ان وانتوا بتاخدوا معلومات عن الفيزياء والكيمياء والأحياء، تقوي اللغة بتاعتكم في نفس الوقت. حاجة تقدر تستخدمها أو تقدر تستخدميها في حياتك الشخصية، في العمل، في رؤية الأفلام بدون ترجمة. يعني مهارة كلنا متفقين إنها مهارة. أي حد بيتعلم لغة إضافية هو مكسب كبير جدا على المستوى العملي كمان، مش حتى على المستوى فقط المعنوي. لا، بيروح يدور على شغل وبيكتب ان هو يتقن اللغة الفلانية واللغة العلانية، بيكون فرصه كويسة جدا في التحصيل على وظيفة جيدة يعني، وبراتب مناسب. طيب انا هبتدي انهي واعطي بقى الميكروفون لصديقنا العزيز برنس، لو حابب يقول اي حاجة في نهاية اللقاء. اتفضل يا برنس.
شكرا يا هاني، وشكرا على الاستضافة طبعا، وبس ناجح. أتمنى إنه نتقابل مع دكتور أدير وبيرس، جوناثان بيرس، خصوصا هو عنده كتاب نزله يعني well received، يعني كتاب ناجح، 30 argument ضد وجود الإله. ممكن اللي هو الكتاب اللي عرضه على الشاشة. وأنا كنت يعني عايز أسأله عن الكتاب دوت، عن بعض الارجيومنتس اللي فيه.
هنعمل بودكاست
هيبقى-
عليه، وعلى فكره على اليوتيوب مغطينه قبل كده، مغطين ده في 4 أو 5 أجزاء. اكتب كده 30 arguments against the existence of God، هتلاقيه موجود على اليوتيوب في حلقات. بس الكلام ده حصل من 4 5 سنين. هنعمله على التيك توك مرة تانية، وهنمسك الكتاب مثلا كل بث مثلا ناخد 5 حجج مثلا، ونركز على 5 حجج، يعني نعملها مثلا على 6 حلقات.
هايل. وأتمنى اللقاء ناجح مع بروفيسور ديف. أنا شفت قناته على اليوتيوب، هو قناة ناجحة جدا، يعني زي ما انت قلت فيها تقريبا حتى يمكن 4 مليون متابع، وتقريبا 2000 فيديوز، يعني 2000 فيديو في العلوم. بس أنا بتساءل يعني لو هو عمل فيديو عن بول البعير ولا لسه.
لا ده هو
لو ما
ده
عملش.
اختصاصه، ده هو ماسك المسطحين. ده شوف مناظراته ضد المسطحين، يا نهار ابيض. هو شرس جدا على فكرة، يعني شرس، مش لطيف يعني. بي هيعجب المتحدثين باللغة العربية، بيحبوا الشخص الحمش ده، انت عارف، فهو هيعجبهم.
تفتكر انه يشبه شويه بروفيسور ادير شويه كده في الشكل؟
في
ولا انا
الشكل
بتهيألي؟
في جزء في فعلا في جزء الدقن، بس مش دقن، مش بنفس الطول.
يا
في فيهم شنب من بعض.
شكرا يا هاني. طيب انا هتابع الحلقه ديت بكره على اليوتيوب، واتمنى لك السلامه، واتمنى لكل الاصدقاء يعني يعني يوم جميل.
انا دخلت احمد ومازن لان هم يظهر مش عارف، مازن بيطلب بس ما بيتكلمش، فانا مش عارف اعمل ايه معاه، عنده مشكلة غريبة. طب ناخد احمد. ازيك يا احمد؟ انت عايز تقول
ازيك
حاجة
يا
قبل كده؟
هاني؟
تمام.
لا بس يعني بفنش واقول لك، يعني كان نفسي احضر. كنت لسه سامع لطيف امبارح او اول امبارح، موضوع اللي هو بيلي كارسون ده مع جو. كان مضحك قوي ولذيذ.
هو لا هو
لا
كويس
لا،
يعني.
هو متخصص. هيعجب فعلا. هيعجب
هاي
المتحدثين بالعربي.
متحدثين باللغة العربية. هو ماسك المسطحين، ماسك أي شخص بيتكلم بالسودو ساينس، بيمسكهم بيجلدهم يعني الحقيقة. ما بي ما بي يعني الحقيقة يعني بيديهم، بس يعني بعتقد هو عنيف، يعني بالنسبة لي شوية عنيف يعني. شوفوا مناظرته مع جيمس تور، مسك الراجل، راجل عجوز، مسح بيه البلاط. فأنا صعب
لا
عليا
هو من
والله.
ناحيه عنيف فهو عنيف، لا من ناحيه عنيف فهو عنيف.
اه هو في العنف عنيف.
انا انا لسه شوف ممكن بيتكلم مع جوردن بيترسون ولا حاجه.
لا
بقول
جوردن
لك تحت.
بيترسون. لا هيعصبني جوردن بيترسون انه بيلعب بالكلام. ده راجل، مش ده راجل بيلعب ده قعدهم يا
قراني.
جماعه. ده يقعد مع الدهريه والمتكلمين، ده يمشي معاهم.
مع القرانيين.
والدهريه ولا ايه
خالص.
يعني ماذا تقصد بواجب الوجود و... واجد الوجوب
لا بالظبط، لا ده جوردن ده ما تعرفش تبدا معاه يعني ما تعرفش تبدا معاه كونفرسيشن وتكمل على نفس المسلمات. What do you mean by God? What do you mean by God?
يلا do you
مش
believe in God?
هتخلص.
It depends on what you mean by God. يعني ايه ده؟ ما تقول are you Christian؟ واحد بيقول له ده عنده مناظرة اسمها a Christian takes on 20 atheists or something، بيحطوا، فهو في النص في حلقة كده فيها ناس، عارف
شفتها
الديبيت
دي
ده. فواحد
يا
بيقول له are you Christian؟ قال له، قعد يلف ويدور، فقال له انت اسم التايتل بتاع الديبيت اسمه a Christian debating 20 atheists، انت كريستيان ولا لا؟ مش عايز يرد. حاجة غريبة.
هو يعني وبص يعني بيفكك الامور بدون حاجه للتفكيك. يعني اوقات ان احنا نفكك الامور يعني نحلل المعنى بيكون مفيد، لكن هو ما بيستخدمش الطريقه دي. لا هو فعلا بدون اي فائده يعني. على العموم بس
بيعقد اي
وفق
حاجة.
يعني.
بيعقد اي حاجة، يعني
بالظبط،
اي حاجة
بدون
يتقال
حاجه
لي
للتعقيد.
سؤال بسيط جدا عاوز يخليك ان انت تحس ان انت سألت سؤال، يعني مثلا ما هو معنى الحياة، يعني سؤال عادي. لو سمحت الساعة
يعني
كام يا
هو
ريس؟
هو بيميل للاستعراض اكتر من الموضوعيه.
اتفق.
الاستعراض و يا
ده العوضي بتاع كندا. ما هي بقى دي والله
ما تفكرنيش بقى.
هي دي بيرسونا. هي ما هو الراجل دي بيرسونا، يعني دي شخصية تمثيلية. واعتقد العوضي ما كانش بالشكل ده، ولا كان مجنون ولا نيلة. هو عارف من اين تؤكل الكتف بصراحة، لان انا شفت ليه فيديوهات بيتكلم عادي جدا. وانا وقال واحد بيسأله بيقول له انت بتقول كلام، بيقولوا الناس كلامك كلام فارغ وبتضحك على الناس. قال له بضحك على الناس، ما انا عبيط لو لقيت ناس يستحقوا انهم يضحك عليهم وانا ما اضحكش عليهم. تخيل. ففي ناس راحه للمنطقه البراجماتيه. انت عندك ناس في شخصيات على التيك توك موجوده، هو بيصدر شخصيه معينه، بيرسونا، كاركتر كده. الكاركتر ده بيجذب للناس، controversial، الناس بتتخانق عليه فبتتفرج، فبيشد الزباين. بس شخصيه
بالظبط. يعني في ناس بتبقى بلوفيس تماما من موضوع الكونتروفيرسي ده، بس مش يعني يعني كتير جدا من اللي عارفين ان كيف يخلقوا الكونتروفيرسي بيستخدموها بشكل سلبي. يعني هم
وفي فرق ما بين في فرق ما بين الاوثنتيك كونتروفيرشال. يعني في شخص فعلا هو فعلا طبيعته كده واراءه كده، هتلاقيها بتطلع في الشخص اللي هو كونتروفيرشال طول الوقت تعرف انها بيرسونا.
هو تيف ده واحد منهم.
يعني برنس اوثنتيك. ليه برنس تلاقيه بتتكلم معاه بشكل عادي جدا، بشكل عادي جدا، وفجأة يروح ده فقعك مفاجأة تقول ده. فهو ده الاوثنتيك.
مرة واحدة يسيب لك الدين.
فجأة
يا بيرفكت اكزامبل برنس يعني.
طيب انا ابتدي خلاص هنهي كده يا جماعه. متشكر جدا. فاللقاء ده هيكون الساعه 3 بعد الظهر بتوقيتي انا، يعني 8 صباحا بتوقيت القاهره. بتثبت على اليوتيوب. اللقاء اللي انتوا شفتوه دلوقتي هيروح على
هو يا هاني معلش دكتور بافلوف كان ليك سؤال. حضرتك يا دكتور بافلوف كان ليك سؤال. لاحظتك، اعذرني يعني، لاحظتك النهارده كنت بسال سؤال في الكومنتس، مش عارف كنت حابب تساله للجيست اللي كانوا موجودين معانا ولا ايه؟
انا ما خدتش بالي يا دكتور بابليك. انا ما كنتش، والله كنت مركز جدا مستمتع بالحوار مع الاصدقاء.
انا ما كنتش متاكد اذا هي he's stating something ولا is asking a question.
انا مش عاوز اصلا موجود معانا. انا مش شايف موجود. ده كان موجود معانا ولا لا؟ موجود. السيليكون بيست كواليا.
سيليكون بيست كواليا.
يعني لو في سيليكون بيست living entities، يعني الكواليا بتاعتها هتكون شكلها عامل ازاي؟ هي اصلا الكواليا يعني ما انا ليا نظره في الكواليا. انا ممكن هنفتح، هو بص لازم هنخش طالما نتكلم على الكواليا يبقى نخش على الكونشسنس والوعي. ممكن الوعي نجيب نفس الضيوف، الوعي من قبل العلم scientist view philosopher view، وانا اضيف الفيو بتاعي اللي هي في منطقه ممكن تربط ما بين الاثنين بس ونشوف. بس
حابب احضر يعني يبقى شيار لي اكيد ضروري.
بس انا مش عايز اضيف على التعقيد للكواليا. خلينا الاول attend to our own كواليا، وبعد كده نروح للكواليا اللي هي ممكن تكون موجوده في هذا الكون الفسيح.
هو حسب علم يعني نو ساينتفك بروف ان السيليكون بيست اللي عندها كواليا حتى الان يعني، ولا ايه؟
واصلا لا، مش مشكله ان في سيليكون، المشكله ان احنا اصلا نثبت ان في سيليكون بيزد ليفينج انتيتيز الاول، وبعد كده نشوف اذا كان عندها كواليا ولا لا. عامل زي فاكر محمد صبحي في مسرحيه الجوكر لما بيقول له لم التعابين العاوي، لم التعابين يا ابني، لم التعابين. فراح محمود العاوي مسرك قال له هي فين التعابين؟ فين التعابين؟ قال له طب فين الضابط؟ لانه كان في واحد ضابط بيقول له لم التعابين يا ابني. فايه انت بتتخيل حاجه وتبني على التخيل تخيل اضافي. فالاول اتاكد من البدايه هل فعلا في silicon based living entities، وبعد كده do they have consciousness and what consciousness seems like، يعني كيف يبدو لهم هذا الconsciousness من خلال السيليكون بيست كواليتي.
هاني انا فهمتها بشكل مختلف شويه. هو يمكن انا فهمتها من سيليكون فالي. فهو يمكن السؤال عن الاي اي انتليجنس والكمبيوتر انتليجنس سيليكون بيز انا فهمتها كده يعني، ممكن تتاكد منها.
يعني AI كواليا يعني.
بالظبط. هو تقريبا السؤال بتاعه حوالين هل ممكن يكون AI كواليا او كده. بالظبط.
سيليكون اوكي، ده قصة تانية. should there be any differences between carbon based and silicon based? Does it have to be alive? اوكي، لا واضح ان هو شايف التكملة بتاعته، واضح ان هو بيتكلم عن اللايف، اللي هو السيليكون بيز لايف. شايف التعليق؟
اوكي تمام.
بس داخل الكونفرسيشن مع الاي اي، داخل الكونفرسيشن، هل الكونشسنس ده بيبقى فيه كريتيكال ماس، يحصل تعقد معين لاي سيستم لاي نظام فينشأ؟ بس انا هو بافلوف حابب انه يطلع، خلينا نسلم عليه، ما بيطلعش الا تخاطيف يعني.
مساء الخير،
اهلين وسهلين
حبايبي كلكم. انا مش هتكلم كتير، انا عارف انك عايز تمشي، انا بس بوضح يعني. احنا اخترعنا الترم بتاع كواليا ده عشان نوصف التجربة الإنسانية، ونوصف ان في حاجة بتحصل بنفهم فيها اللون الأحمر وبنابريشيت بيها اللون الأحمر. طيب ما هو برضو في حاجة جوه السيليكون، ما بين قوسين السيليكون مايند ده اللي هو الاي اي، في جواه بروسيس تانية بيابريشيت بيها اللون الأحمر بشكله هو الخاص. يعني هل ليه ما نقولش على ان دي this is another form of qualia برضو؟ هو ده سؤال.
هو مش لازم يكون هو conceive، حتى مش لازم appreciate conceive of the color red. ولو كان مثلا a living being that cannot conceive colors for whatever reason، يعني color blind، لأنها not necessary to its survival. ايه المشكلة؟ they conceive other things necessary to their survival. بس المهم they conceive of something، صح؟ whatever that thing is.
تمام. هو المقصود ان السبجكتيف اكسبيرينس.
ايوه.
ما هو الاي اي عنده a form of subjective experience in its own terms in zeros and ones. احنا عندنا باكشن بوتنشال وصوديوم بوتاسيوم بامب في ال في ال في ال في النيرف فايبرز بتاعتنا، لكن في الاي اي برين عنده zeros and ones. So but both are ما بين قوسين a subjective experience.
هو انا اعتقد الدكتور بافلوف يقصد حاجه هاني، يمكن يعني حسب فهمي، هو منذ ان اصبح الاي اي يعني سيلف اوتونوموس، يعني عنده قدره على اتخاذ القرار بنفسه، تمام، عنده قدره على التصرف ذاتيا. فمن هنا خلاص هو نقدر نقول كده انه في كاركتر موجوده، والتصرفات اللي بيستخدمها دي قد تكون لها يعني كواليا بقى، يعني ديب، يعني قد يكون لها مفهوم اعمق. هل فهمي ده صح يا دكتور باولو؟
ايوه. ونقدر نقول ساعتها انه yes it is conscious لو على حسب تعريفنا للكونشسنس.
هقول لك المشكله فين.
أوكي.
المشكله ان دايما بيكون في pattern of behavior associated with conscious beings. يعني مثلا في البانسايكيزم بيقول لك ان في consciousness في كل حاجه، يعني قطعه الحجر فيها consciousness. ده في البانسايكيزم، بس بترفض في المجمل العام. ليه؟ لان بيقول لك I cannot see a behavior that support the behavior of a conscious being. How do I know that you're conscious? Because
that was by design. That was by design يا هاني. That was by design. يعني by design ال AI machine مش محطوط فيها emotions عشان by design that would cause problems. مش محطوط فيها unconscious اللي هو بيcontrol most of our behavior عشان it would cause so many bugs also known as mental illness. فاهم ازاي؟ ف by design it was stripped from so many human qualities intentionally.
يعني انت بتتكلم على artificial selection، يعني implanted consciousness as an artificial selection. احنا بس الconsciousness الفرق بتاعنا ما بينهم وما بينهم هم ان هو هيبقى artificially implanted، واحنا evolve through natural selection. بس ده الفرق.
هو الطريقة اللي بيجنريت بيها الانسر بتاعته هو صحيح predictive ماشين، بس البريدكتيف ماشين دي it predicts the answer الكوريكت انسر اللي هيجاوبني بيها الجي بي تي بنفس الطريقة اللي التشايلد اتعلم بيها من اهله ازاي يبريدكت الجود انسر اللي يجاوب بيها اهله لما يسألوه سؤال. it was the exact same way، بس الفرق ان هو اسرع شوية. اتعلمهم على large data set، اوكي، بينما الطفل يحتاج كام سنة على بال ما يعرف ياخد enough vocab.
What
لكن
what about the feeling of pain and joy?
by design انت by design ال AI was stripped from so many things by design intentionally. يعني ما ينفعش ان انا احط فيه انا ممكن ان انا design programmatically a process to mimic human love. Yes, we can do that programmatically, but that would cause so many problems that wouldn't be practical.
وethical كمان، يعني هدخل كمان لسه كائنات تعاني مش كفايه.
Exactly. وعشان اقرب اكتر من الهيومن بيهيفير لازم ادخل السبكونشس، وساعتها طالما دخلت سبكونشس هيبقى فيه mental health problems، وهيبقى عنده depression، وهيجي له anxiety، وهيجي له so many problems.
وممكن يحصل لك بقى فري رايدرز ويطلع لك منهم شويه مجرمين، ما هو بقى خلاص بقى فري تشويس
مثلا
اه
مثلا
اه مشكله كبيره. لا قصه انا متفق معاك تماما. الفرق بقى ايه؟ انها هتكون implanted، بس ما انت لما تحطها وتقول ان احنا we don't have free will و everything that seems to be a free choice of ours is predicated on older things that we had no choice of plus the زائد ان احنا ممكن نكون فعلا عايشين في السيميوليشن، والروبوتات اللي احنا بنتكلم عليها دي وانها الكونشسنس ما عملولهاش امبلانتيشن، انها ممكن تكون حدثت بالفعل واحنا نتاج الحاجات اللي انت بتتكلم عليها بس في المستقبل.
I'm still not buying موضوع السيميليشن ده.
لسه مش مقتنع بيه.
لا لسه يعني I see يعني too much anthropomorphic كده، بيانثروبومورفايز اليونيفرس، انه لازم يكون في ناس زينا هم اللي عملوه فكده يعني.
مش لازم يكون ناس، بس هو احسن من الالهه، يعني هيكون الاول
او
لوجيكال
فولكنز
او older civilization. يعني مثلا من الكون القديم اللي طلع منه الكون بتاعنا مثلا بقالهم 50 مليار سنه، فوصلوا بالعلوم لمنطقه، يعني عملوا السيميوليشن اللي احنا بنحاول نعمله دلوقتي، بس بقى محترفين فيه مثلا يعني، وما فيهوش سوبر ناتشرال ايلمنتس.
وكان في قبلهم كمان عملهم، طالما هنفتح السيره دي فساعتها يبقى احنا يعني احنا a very rare instance ان احنا الوحيدين اللي مش عارفين نعمل كده، بينما في infinite series of creators قبلنا.
نيل ديجراس تايسون قال لك حاجه من الاثنين، يا اما احنا البيز رياليتي، يا احنا الناس الرقم واحد اللي في اول الصف اللي بتحاول تعمل كده، او احنا في المنطقه الاخيره خالص اللي هي ان كل مجموعه انسانيه او مجموعه كائنات حيه عشان تصل لهذه التكنولوجي ما بيحصلش انستنتينيوس، بتاخد فتره من الزمن وبعد كده انت توصل لها تعمل سيميوليشن وبعد كده يعمل سيميوليشن، يعني في learning phase.
too good to be true.
بس مش احسن من شق البحر والتعابين والكلام؟
هو ما فيش فرق على فكره، يعني الكرياتورز بتوعنا بتوع اللي عملوا السيميليشنز اكيد بيعرفوا يشقوا البحر هم كمان يعني.
بس ده مش مهتم بقى ان انت بتعمل ايه في غرفتك بالليل وانت قاعد على الكمبيوتر، ده مش مهتم.
اكيد
ماشي يا حبيبي دكتور بافلو، متشكر جدا جدا على قدومك، انا عارف ان انت بتكون مشغول.
حبايبي
الله يخليك، متشكر قوي.
طيب
متشكر قوي يا جماعه. طيب يبقى زي ما قلت بكره الساعه 8 صباحا بتوقيت القاهره، 3 بتوقيت عندي انا، 3 بعد الظهر، ديف فارينا، ولقاء اسمه The Pursuit of Knowledge او البحث عن المعرفه، A Modern Critique of Epistemology. ده السبتايتل بتاع الموضوع. يعني هنخش فيه كيف بقى ان احنا نعرف ونظريات المؤامره والفاكسين وعالم السحالي اللي بيحكم العالم، والأقزام اللي بيحرسوا منطقة أطراف الأرض عشان الناس ما تكتشفش إنها مسطحة. هنخوض في كل هذه الأشياء اللي انتوا بتحبوها يا جماعة and more. شوفكم على خير. كنتم مع هاني سليم وقناة Critical Faculty. It's on YouTube. أيوة هيكون على اليوتيوب موجود دلوقتي. لو تخشوا على قناة اليوتيوب هتلاقوها مثبتة، تقدروا تعملوا لها يعني لايك او فولو او نوتيفاي، بحيث انها لما تطلع لايف تبتدوا تتفرجوا عليها. والتسجيل هيكون موجود، وبعد التسجيل بيكون في السبتايتل او الترجمة عشان الناس اللي هي لا تتقن اللغة الإنجليزية تقدر يعني تشوف المحتوى باللغة العربية. متشكر جدا لكم يا جماعة، وأتمنى لكم كلكم يوم جمعة سعيد.